Alright, so I'm going to be rating every episode of Total Drama, but this isn't going to be a completely new video. I actually rated every episode of Total Drama prior to Total Drama Island Season 2 rematch releasing. Then I ended up making a video rating all of those episodes. So this video is nothing new. It's just going to be combining those two videos into one video. So yeah, it's time to get in here. Let's go. Alright. It's time to rate every episode of Total Drama. All seasons of Total Drama will be covered, except for Total Drama Rama. Although I will say that when I got the vision for this video, I was only planning on going up to Pahkitew Island, as Ridonculous Race is a spin-off and was just a completely different game. And Total Drama Island 2023 wasn't out yet when I got the idea to make this video, and still isn't out in the United States as of the recording of this video. I still covered those two seasons, but in the end, I just have way more to say about the seasons pre-Ridonculous Race. So all seasons except for Drama Rama will be covered. Also, my rating or grading system is going to be based on how much I like the episode. Highest grade will be an A, lowest grade will be an F. Now, it's time to get in here. Total Drama Island, episode 1 and 2, Not So Happy Campers, part 1 and 2. These episodes are an introduction to the island of Wawanakwa and the campers that will be living there. There were some pretty cool moments in here, like when Lashana arrived at the scene, Owen jumping off the cliff, and Ezekiel crafting his own downfall. When I was younger, I never really understood why players went home. Now I understand, and it's nice to see how eliminations materialize. I'm going to give these episodes A grades. Episode 3, The Big Sleep. This episode is about the awake-a-thon, who can stay awake the longest. There was one moment that I always held on to, which was Justin getting caught cheating in the challenge for some reason, but it wasn't even the best part of this episode. Back then, I did not realize how good Heather was playing. She took Eva's MP3 player, which made her mad, and got her to go off on her team, which got her, one of the strongest competitors on the season, voted out second. Heather made that happen. Mastermind strategy. This episode gets an A rating. Episode 4, Dodge Brawl. This episode is a dodgeball challenge. Nothing like off the wall crazy happened. It's just a simple game of dodgeball, which I was all for. It brings me back to when I was a kid. I was a dodgeball beast, so yeah, I'm giving this episode an A. Episode 5, Not Quite Famous, the talent show episode. Harold's beatbox solo will always be epic, but the main event was when Heather read Gwen's diary on national TV and officially became the biggest villain in Total Drama history, at least so far. It's only the first season, but yeah, peak drama. I'm giving this episode an A. Episode 6, The Sucky Outdoors. This episode was about the teams spending an entire night outside. This wasn't an epic, action-packed, drama-filled episode or anything, but at least they got rid of one of the annoying sisters, the annoying friends, so it's gonna get a B. Episode 7, Phobia Factor. This episode was about everyone facing their fears, and it was cool to see that play out, like Gwen being buried alive. That was one that always stuck with me. And Trent running away from that mime was good fun. But it's crazy how Courtney chickened out of 2 challenges, but Tyler got voted out. Like, the plot armor started way before action. I think this episode could have been better if the challenge ended with someone overcoming their fears rather than running away from them, but for what it was, it's gonna get an A. This is such a memorable, standout episode of Total Drama Island. Episode 8, Up the Creek, the Boney Island episode. I remember this episode was so hyped up, like, oh, it's Boney Island, but it ended up being an episode where that Gwen, Trent, and Cody love dynamic was a big focus. It isn't even a love triangle. It's just Cody being a third wheel simp. But this episode had some good suspense, with Trent and Lindsay sinking in the quicksand and Jeff getting injured and having to deal with that. Also, Izzy making that inferno was nice. This episode was hyped up too much and didn't really deliver. It wasn't that amazing, but for what it was, it's a B episode. Episode 9, Paintball Deer Hunter. This episode was a paintball competition. There were some good moments in here, like Owen getting rocked by DJ, and Beth finally standing up to Heather. I don't look at this episode as a standout episode of Total Drama Island, but it's still a solid B episode. It was fun to watch. Episode 10, If You Can't Take the Heat. It was a cooking challenge. It was mid. This episode really relied on Lashana and Heather's arguments to carry, to which they held up their end of the deal. But the other little side plot was DJ and Jeff pranking Harold, which wasn't all that funny, so I'm gonna give this episode a C. Episode 11, Who Can You Trust? It's basically just a bunch of trust-based challenges, which had a bunch of hilarious moments in there, like Heather building up that villainous image by ripping off Gwen's skirt and just leaving her there, exposed, and the dish that Lindsay made that ruined Trent, and Lindsay getting Heather stung by a jellyfish. Also, Sadie left, so this is definitely an A. Episode 12, Basic Straining. It's the Dunkney episode. I don't like Dunkney because of Courtney, but that doesn't really matter here because at least in Island, she's alright. It's kind of brutal how they fell in love just for them to both be on the chopping block with Courtney getting voted out. But yeah, I didn't like the challenge that much, but Dunkney, at least for this episode in Total Drama Island, they were fun, so I'm gonna give this episode an A-. Episode 13, Extreme Torture. The big storyline for this episode is Gwen and Bridget fighting over this love poem that they thought either Trent or Jeff wrote. I wasn't a fan of this storyline. Also, I wasn't freaking out over any of these challenges except for the water skiing challenge because Harold got flashed by Heather, and that was a fun moment because of what it led to, with Harold and Lashana hooking up and Lashana finding out about him getting flashed. But yeah, the letter plot line was kind of mid, so I'll give this episode a B. It was still fun. Episode 14, Brunch of Disgustingness. All I gotta say is, it's not Lashana's fault. They wanted her to drink blended roaches, like, it's not her fault. It's just that Owen's such a tank, and if all of the invincibility challenges were eating challenges, then he's a comp beast. But yeah, it was a non-elimination episode, but this was actually a fun non-elimination episode, unlike in future seasons, so this is gonna get an A grade. Episode 15, No Pain, No Game. Izzy is my favorite character, so I like that she got a second chance. On the other hand, I actually don't like Eva at all. She was mad at Bridget, acting like she was the only person that voted her out of the game. Plus, Heather actually sniped her out of the game, so I don't know why she's mad at just Bridget, but okay. But yeah, seeing Eva get taken out by Lashana just as fast as she got in the game was nice. This is an A episode, especially because of the ending. Episode 16, Search and Don't Destroy. So basically, this challenge was a scavenger hunt. This is when the game started getting rigged for Heather. So she's gonna create this little scene to get in between Gwent by lying to Trent about Gwen, saying she's mean, and then she kissed Trent in front of Gwen. So that split them up. Then, when Lashana heard about this, she gathered up all the votes to send Heather packing, just for Heather to luckily get invincibility when she was on the chopping block, which left Trent as a sitting duck. 1. Everyone needs a Lashana in their life. She went all out for Gwen. 2. Trent got robbed because of a misunderstanding, and it's unfortunate because Total Drama Island was his best season as a character. And last, I gotta admit that even though the circumstances causing Heather to survive here were questionable, Heather is running that island, causing so much chaos, but it's strategic chaos. This was such a good episode. Definitely an A, probably the best one so far. Episode 17, Hide and Be Sneaky. Yep, it's a hide and seek challenge. A guys alliance formed in this episode between Jeff, DJ, Owen, and Duncan, cause they're in the minority. 4-6. The Izzy and Chef showdown was also nice to see, and Lashana won invincibility, but so did Heather, which is pretty wild that she could earn invincibility after being eliminated from the challenge. Heather at this point is public enemy number 1. Her social game is bad, but she has the biggest moves of the season under her belt. She could win in a jury vote, which they think that the winner is going to be decided by this season. She could win that, but no one really wants to take her near the end. Anyways, the girls were talking about how a guy has to go, and they seem to be shocked when Bridget left, even though they had the numbers. Even Jeff didn't vote for Bridget, so there's no excuse for a girl going home here. I've tried to dissect this vote and theorize where all of the votes would land, but right now, it doesn't make any sense. But that's minor. This is an A tier episode. Episode 18. That's off the chain. The challenge is that they're building bikes and racing them. There's only one thing to talk about in this episode. So in the challenge, Heather crossed the finish line first and won invincibility. That's 3 invincibility wins for her. Lindsay crossed the finish line second, which should give her invincibility, but since Owen and Duncan wiped out, they didn't cross the finish line, meaning that Lindsay was the last to cross the finish line, which means that she's eliminated. Before a certain other contestant got robbed, Lindsay was the most robbed player in all of Total Drama. Like, she beat Duncan and Owen. Are you telling me you couldn't get those two in a sudden death match or something? Plus, there was another round before this one to even qualify for the finals, but because of how the challenge was set up, the players that didn't make the finals all basically got immunity, while the players that qualified for the finals were all at risk of being eliminated if they were the last to cross the finish line, which means that it's better to lose in round 1 than to win. One invincibility winner and a regular vote would have made a lot of sense, but in the end, this comes off as a challenge that didn't really have the most thought put into it. Anyways, Lindsay begged Heather to give her invincibility, to which, if it were a vote, that's more realistic, but if Heather gives up immunity, according to Chris's rules, she's eliminated, so you gotta keep it. But Lindsay finally got her moment. No good, selfish, heartless, pushy, bossy, mean, bully of a girl. She finally let it all out after being a blind follower in a parasitic relationship. It was sad to see her go because she's one of my favorites and should have still been there. The episode around the Lindsay Heather moment was alright, but that moment carries this to an A- episode. Episode 19. Hook, Line, and Screamer. It's basically just the campers running away from the executioner. The executioner was Chef, which kind of reminds me of that hide and seek episode when he was chasing them around. This even reminds me of Paintball Deer Hunter, like just the concept of being hunted. Like, they've already had this archetype of challenge before. The only major thing that happened was Owen and Izzy making out, just for Owen to throw her under the bus to the executioner. Wow. At least Gwen won invincibility, but there wasn't a vote for elimination, so production pet Heather got saved once again. Not really high on this episode, and honestly, it gets outclassed by 2 episodes with similar challenges, so it's gonna get a C. Episode 20. Wawanakwa Gone Wild. It's a challenge where everyone got assigned an animal and they had to trap it and bring it back. No immunity in this episode. It was only a reward challenge followed by a regular vote. Not a lot happened outside of Duncan and Heather making a little alliance. Also, Izzy got eliminated for good, which is unfortunate for me because she's my favorite character. But yeah, this is a C tier episode, not the most memorable episode of Island. Episode 21. Trial by Tri-Armed Triathlon. Basically, the final 6 got broken up into pairs and handcuffed together and had to compete in challenges together. The most entertaining pair was Jeff and Gwen. It's just amazing how, in the beginning of this episode, Gwen had all of these assumptions about Jeff, but they were able to talk it out and actually become good friends by the end of it all, which made Jeff's elimination so sad. But yeah, in terms of Gwen's journey throughout this season, this affects how I feel about the ending of this season. So yeah, I'm gonna give this episode an A, mainly for Gwen and Jeff. Episode 22, Hot Capture, or After the Dock of Shame. Basically, this is like Survivor Ponderosa or Australian Survivor Jury Villa if they got a full episode. Everyone still thinks that the game will be decided by a jury vote. From what I got, if the season were decided by a jury vote, Heather loses next to anyone. She has the strategy, she can win some comps if production rigs it for her, but her jury management is terrible. Duncan and Owen seemed like they were in the same boat, getting neutral reactions, but they really liked Gwen, and it seemed like if Lashana made it to the end, she would get all of the votes. So it only makes sense that the jury would vote her out of the game. Lashana was the most robbed player of this season. Trent got outplayed, and Lindsay could have possibly gamed around her situation, but Lashana had no control over what happened. Lashana. Even after Chris said that the votes count, they kept on saying her name. Lashana was just a complete sitting duck in that situation. I'm gonna have to give this episode a B. Although it was away from the action, the ending was funny. Episode 23, Camp Castaways. Not even gonna waste a bunch of time on this. It's a bizarro filler type of episode where the campers got stranded on a deserted island, and in the end, they voted out a coconut. It's an F episode. There's not enough contestants left to have filler episodes. Also, this one wasn't even funny like Brunch of Disgustingness, so it barely had anything going for it. Episode 24, Are We There Yeti? Basically, it's a battle of the genders. They got stranded in the forest and had to find their way out. Terrible idea for the final four, especially when you're Duncan and you're partnered with Owen. Before I get into that, there was some fun to be had, like Heather and Gwen fleecing the guys, stealing their stuff because Duncan let his guard down for Heather. Aww! Gwen and Heather could have been such a good team. But yeah, in the end, Duncan got robbed because his partner was Owen. This episode is gonna get an A- grade. Good fun. Episode 25, I Triple Dog Dare You. So it's basically the final three competing in these dares that the eliminated contestants made. There's only one thing that happens in this episode, and it's the downfall of Heather. So basically what happened was halfway through the challenge, Owen gave half of his freebies to Gwen because she promised Owen half of the prize money, and that basically made Heather get all of the dares. And the last dare was Lindsay's dare, saying, hey, shave your head. Heather refused, but because of an accident, she got her head shaved anyways, and because she didn't accept the dare, she got eliminated. Crazy how Lindsay said, I hope you get everything your karma owes you, and it was her dare that sniped Heather out of the game. I actually grew to like Heather this season, definitely more than when I was like 8 or 9 watching this and didn't like her at all, but I'm not saying that her downfall wasn't absolutely glorious to watch. Gwen got the upper hand, and it was nice to see. A-tier episode for sure. Skipping over the TDI rundown filler episode, episode 26, the very last episode. Really, it's a showdown. Gwen versus Owen. As a kid, I was a big Owen fan, so I was happy to see him win, but now that I've gotten a chance to watch the season recently, honestly, this is Gwen's season more than Owen's. Like, she's more important to this season than Owen. So yeah, A episode for the Gwen ending. Episode 27, Total Drama, Drama Island. It was basically the winner giving up their prize money to give everyone a chance to compete for $1 million. Now, Gwen got robbed. I didn't watch the episode, kind of hard to get a hold of, but unlike Owen, in her version, I read that she didn't want to give up the money, but according to the contracts, if a higher prize is offered, they have to compete. Unfortunate, but at least this episode was so chaotic, with everyone fighting over the million, getting their hands on it at some point, then losing it in the funniest way. In the end, it ended in a 14-way tie, and those contestants are going to compete for it on Total Drama Action. At least they got some good characters and left out the bad ones, like the annoying friends and Eva. This episode is an A-tier episode. There's not much for me to complain about in Total Drama Island. The challenges were fun. The romance and relationships were actually handled well in this season. The drama was amazing, especially the drama that Heather created. And Heather herself is definitely a top tier villain and a top tier character in all of Total Drama. The only bad thing that I can say about this season is that there was a 2-episode stretch of filler, Hot Capture and Camp Castaways. 2 episodes that took place away from the game, or they weren't traditional gameplay episodes. They make this season drag on a bit longer, but in the end, Total Drama Island as a whole is a solid season. Total Drama Action, Episode 1, Monster Cash. So yeah, in this episode, the 14 returning contestants got to see the new location they're going to be at, which is a movie set. For the first challenge, they ran away from a monster, which ended up not mattering, just a warm-up challenge. Maybe the winner would have an advantage in the second challenge, but that will never be known because Owen ate all of the fake food before Chris could even explain the rules, which ended up working out for him because it was a challenge to find a key in all of the fake food. He ended up fumbling when it came to picking out the trailer, but he got lucky when the other trailer got crushed. If that didn't happen, it was going to be ugly for him. This is a C-tier episode. Nothing really special about this episode. It was mid for a premiere. Episode 2, Alien Resurrection. Basically, the challenge was to find alien eggs and bring them back. There were some fun moments in here, like Izzy and Chef having another epic showdown, and Heather losing her wig, having her bald head exposed for most of the season. The one negative isn't even a negative for this episode. It's just that near the end of this episode, that's when that Gwen, Trent, and Duncan storyline started. But it wasn't as bad here as it was in other episodes. So yeah, I actually left this episode very satisfied. So it's gonna get an A. Episode 3, Riot on Set. This episode is going to be about the contestants hauling film equipment up a hill and making a scene that'll make Chef cry. I don't have anything positive to say about this episode. The challenge was boring in comparison to the action-packed challenges of Total Drama Island. Also, that Gwen, Trent, and Duncan love triangle started to come into play and really takes a bite out of these episodes. Like in this one, when Gwen and Trent were picking teams and got all judgmental about their picks, and Trent got all jealous about Gwen and Duncan hanging out. Like, just talk to her instead of being so cringe. Also, E-Scope got voted out here. Just the perfect storm for an F episode. Talking about riot on set. No! Watching this episode makes me want to riot. Episode 4, Beach Blanket Bogus. The challenges in this episode are going to be beach themed. Standing on a surfboard the longest, making a sandcastle, and a dance-off. Not much positive to say about this episode either. That Gwent and Duncan stuff got a bunch of focus, like Trent seemingly being obsessed with Gwen. Also, Trent threw the challenge for Gwen, like they ate up a lot of story in this episode. Not interested in them, plus the challenges were mid, so this episode is gonna get an F. Episode 5, 310 to Crazy Town. The challenges in this episode were Western themed. For the good, a moment that I liked was when Lashana and Heather had to compete against each other, bringing back that island rivalry. Also, I liked when DJ got electrocuted and Chris dealt with the situation in Chris McClain fashion. Gwent coming to an end and Justin getting Trent out of the game, that was good. But the challenges were horrible and so uninteresting, especially the second one, like roping cattle? Seriously? Challenges alone are gonna knock this episode down to a C rating. Episode 6. The Aftermath 1. Aftermath shows are filler for the most part, especially in this season, which isn't really a terrible idea, especially for the time that Total Drama was made in, but there's also some other episodes in this season that I consider to be filler, making me wish that I would have skipped the Aftermath shows just to save a bit of time. Also, the content in this Aftermath show wasn't that good. It's a continuation of that Gwen, Trent, and Duncan story, with Trent being sad that he and Gwen broke up. It gets a little bit of a pass here because Aftermath shows are supposed to be about reflection, but even with that, this episode is still going to get an F for being the 5th episode in a row focusing on such an uninteresting love dynamic. Episode 7, The Chefshank Redemption. The challenges were prison themed. The first challenge was a gross food eating challenge, and the second challenge was a prison breakout challenge. I like the prison breakout, but the gross food eating challenge was a miss, and that's something that I noticed about this season. They always seem to have 2 challenges in most episodes. The first challenge is usually for an advantage in the next challenge, and the next challenge is usually for reward or invincibility, and at least one part of the challenge is just a complete miss, complete filler. They definitely went for quantity over quality for the challenges in this season. But yeah, this episode is simply about the good and the bad. The good thing was that Izzy got back in the game, as Kaleidoscope was the one that got eliminated. So big dubs because I like Izzy. But to be fair, she was just on an Aftermath show, and out of the first 7 episodes, she only missed 2 of them. Although I did not like Eva in Island, she got eliminated in episode 3 and returned in episode 15. That's enough time to forget about her, so when she came back, it was fresh, something that the show hadn't seen in a while, as opposed to Izzy, where I just saw her in the previous episode, the Aftermath show, and even then, it's only been 2 regular gameplay episodes of her not being in the game. But in the end, for me, her return was a positive. But the bad, because Gwen, quote unquote, owes the Killer Grips one, she got voted out here, which is ridiculous and makes me not like this Gwen, Trent, and Duncan stuff even more because it contributed to why she got taken out of the game. She was completely robbed because of something that she really had no say in. This is up there for one of the most unfair eliminations in all of Total Drama. Gwen was one of my favorite characters in Island, but she was terrible in this season because all of her content was about Trent or Duncan. I understand she already made a deep run last season, so they're gonna give focus to other characters that didn't make that run, so it's understandable why she was mid in action, but man, tough to see. This episode is gonna get a C. Episode 8, One Flew Over the Cuckoos. So the challenges in this episode were medical themed. The challenge doesn't matter. The best part of this episode is the chaos when everyone started freaking out because they were getting symptoms from this pizza that DJ made that was laced with itching powder and laxatives. And because Lashana figured this out, the gaffers won the reward challenge and Lashana cried just to get the family visit. That Lashana bit keeps this episode from being complete filler because it's going to come into play later. But yeah, this episode was fun, so I'm going to give it an A-. Episode 9, The Sandwich Project. These challenges were horror themed. I didn't like the challenges here, but I liked how Lindsay became a leader and really carried her team in this episode. Unfortunate that it didn't result in a challenge win. Also, the other noteworthy thing that happened in this episode was DJ quitting because of his illegal alliance with Chef. I didn't really mind this plot, but also at the same time, it didn't really add anything to the total drama action experience for me, so it's probably a good thing that it ended here so it wouldn't take up any more screen time. I wanted to give this episode a C, but Leader Lindsay is going to get this episode a B-. It's a really good episode for her. Episode 10. Masters of Disasters. The challenges in this episode are going to be disaster themed, which are actually some of the best challenges in the season. Also, in the drowning challenge, Duncan exposing Lashana for crying to get the family visit in the medical challenge was funny, and that's still not the end of this family visit chaos. It's crazy how Lashana can go from a jury favorite in Island to not a villain, but hey, her game is off. The only missed opportunity in this episode was that Screen Hog Owen stayed in the game instead of getting medevac when he broke his jaw. But it's not going to stop this episode from getting an A. Episode 11. Full Metal Drama. War themed challenges. Yet again, the challenge was mid, but at the same time, I'm not really into war like that. Also, my favorite character Izzy got taken out by Justin here, one of the most uninteresting villains in all of Total Drama. The way that he causes eliminations is so boring, especially when compared to Heather last season. Like, Izzy said that Justin's basically overrated and he voted her out of the game. Not thrilling at all. The only good thing that came from this episode is Admiral Lindsay. She's grown so much from Island, and she's going to keep this episode from getting an F. It's going to get a D. Episode 12. The Aftermath 2. Now there's only one thing to talk about here. It's Gwen and Courtney's drama over Duncan. It was amazing, which makes me believe that if Courtney were on the season originally, then she would have added a lot of drama to early Total Drama action had things played out similarly. This episode was the first time in a while that I've actually seen some legit drama rather than nonsense drama, so this episode is going to get an A just off that alone. It only had one good moment, but it was good enough. Episode 13. Oceans 8 or 9. Bank heist challenges for this episode, which remind me a lot of the Prison Break episode. But honestly, some of the moments in here were fun, like when Heather tried to enter the combination to the vault, and every time that she got it wrong, Harold was like, eh. Also, the go-kart race to finish off the challenges was fun. These were some of the best challenges of the season. But Courtney getting back in here, right after I was campaigning for her, saying that she should have been in action from the beginning. This episode shows why it wouldn't have mattered. Probably would have made the season worse. She's annoying, and her lawyers have way too much impact on the game, which is why Owen went out here, because she couldn't be voted for. I don't like Owen, but that's kind of ridiculous. For all of the good that this episode had, the Courtney stuff knocks this episode down to a B+, which is still respectable. Episode 14, 1 million bucks BC. Stone Age challenges for this episode. This episode was about lighting fires and fighting folks with bones. Just not a fan. There's not a lot of fun moments that happen in this episode, which in the end was dominated and ruined by Courtney. She gets to have an advantage in the game and play on easy mode. She's rude to everyone, and in this episode, she's gonna beat Duncan in that bone fighting challenge for reward, which kicks off her hot streak where she's gonna go on a challenge run, which probably doesn't matter anyways because she's just gonna use her lawyers as an excuse to not get voted out. This episode is gonna get a D. It's boring. Episode 15, $1 Million Babies. Sports challenges. Yes, sir. My favorite one of these was that marshmallow boxing one when Lindsay beat the daylight out of Harold, but she lost because she wasn't fighting in slow motion like she was told. Also, the family visit chaos continues as Beth, she got tired of Lashana's trash talk saying that her boyfriend isn't real, so she exposed Lashana for talking trash about the cast with Leshaniqua. Juicy. Like I said before, Lashana had a fall from grace. Once a jury favorite, now she's getting exposed and outplayed by one of the worst players, at least in Island. I've got to say that Beth is playing a better game this time around. Lashana's playing worse, but she ended up making up for it in that cheerleading competition with her apology cheer, so good for her. And to be fair, It was only through Courtney's PDA that Beth was able to expose Lashana, an item that shouldn't have even been in the game. So yeah, just unfortunate. Heather gets voted out here, which, just like Gwen, was another measly showing, especially when compared to Island. In Island, she was not only a main character, but she ran the game. Here, she was just a character, and honestly, her villain role got taken by Justin and Courtney. But even with that slightly underwhelming elimination, the only really bad thing that I have to say here is that I didn't like Duncan losing challenges to Courtney in back-to-back episodes. It's like he's dumbed down and nerfed in challenges to make Courtney so amazing. But this episode is going to get an A. Just too many positives to focus on a minor negative. Episode 16, Dial M for Merger. They merged in this episode. Congratulations to everyone that made it, except for Courtney. Folks that play on easy mode get no respect from me. Anyways, they went back to hating on Lashana again. It's just funny how this family visit is causing so much chaos. Speaking of chaos, they were in this building that was going to explode, and Courtney played with their lives. She refused to let them out of the building until they agreed to give her a cut of the prize money if they won. Heather would never. Courtney is the villain, the antagonist of this season. Anyways, the next challenge was defusing these garbage bombs, and I really liked that challenge because of that high pressure situation, and Lindsay winning it was great. Also, a little bit earlier in this episode, the remaining Total Drama characters were in a shortened 16 intro, and I just realized 16 intro, and this is the 16th episode. So yeah, this is definitely an A episode. Episode 17, Super Herald. Superhero themed challenges. The first challenge was a little cosplay challenge that Lindsay won, and Chris was way too into her. She's a minor, but I'm not surprised because it's not the first time that Chris was enamored with Lindsay. The second challenge was an obstacle course that Courtney won because she's a comp beast in this season. Also, Lashana gets voted out here, and I already said my spiel about Lashana, just a bad season for her. This episode is going to get a C, mainly because the challenges were underwhelming. Episode 18, The Aftermath. 3. The Captain Hollywood episode. This is the episode where Jeff got so clout hungry, so power hungry, that he called Owen broke on national TV, and he was just being unpleasant all around. In Island, I said that there wasn't much to him except for being a party guy, but here, he's Chris McLean. This episode is gonna get a D. Barely any plot significance as expected for a Total Drama action aftermath show, but it's not funny either, so it's just a waste of time. Episode 19, The Princess Pride. It's this fairy tale challenge where Courtney got chosen to be the princess and the contestants had to cross an obstacle bridge. Then the top placers would try and rescue Courtney. No one but Courtney, Duncan, and Justin even matter in this episode. Justin became a huge Courtney simp and tried to take Duncan's girl. Even gave up invincibility for her. Justin was so over the top in this episode, and it was embarrassing. Although he's more of a character in action than he was in Island, in action, he's so cringe, and he's not even a good villain, so it was nice to see him packing his bags in this episode. I wanted to give this episode a C because the challenges were mid, but Justin versus Duncan and Justin's downfall, those are going to get this episode a B. Episode 20. Get a Clue. Mystery themed challenges, channeling their inner Scooby. They're basically trying to find Chris in the first part. It was funny when Lindsay tried to take a crack at solving the mystery, like he said he was on Cloud 9, which is like heaven, so he's dead. Let's dig and look for him, just to get shut down by Duncan for that awful idea. But in the end, Lindsay is going to end up winning this reward challenge, and I've already said this before, but she's grown so much. I really like where they're taking her character this season. It's just an amazing episode for her. The only bad thing I have to say about this episode is that Courtney whining about the prize was annoying, but this episode is going to get a B. It's solid. Episode 21, Rock and Roll. Rock and roll themed challenges. The Courtney and Duncan guitar showdown was fun. Courtney was robbed. She should have won, but she also shouldn't even be in the game, so yeah. Duncan's chaos on the red carpet walk was also funny, but in the end, Courtney wins the last part of the challenge. The wins just keep on racking up for her, kind of like Heather in Island. But Heather's actually a good player. She's not just challenge wins. She has strategy. Courtney's terrible and shouldn't even be on this season. Also, Owen got back into the game as a mole, not a player, which is unfortunate because right when the numbers were starting to get small, by adding him, they guarantee 1 or 2 more filler episodes because that's another person to get out of the game. Finally, one of my favorite characters, Lindsay, left in this episode from a terrible elimination where she voted herself off. There was some good in this episode, like the challenges, but the bad being Owen getting back in the game, Courtney's undeserving and predictable challenge beast run, and Lindsay getting eliminated. They're all gonna get this episode a C. Episode 22, Crouching Courtney, Hidden Owen. Kung Fu challenges. I like Duncan and Harold's side of the story more because they actually had a challenge in the second half of this episode and they became friends. But I didn't like Beth and Courtney's side because it was just them washing dishes, making food, and Courtney begging Beth to be in her alliance over and over and over again. Also, Owen's mole plot really started to come into play here. He's not a good mole. He's very indecisive, giving help to everyone, and even when he was successful, he broke up something good in Harold and Duncan's friendship. I can't say that Owen was irrelevant in this episode, but he's just a screen hog that doesn't need to be there, like he already made the final 2 in Island. Although this episode isn't complete filler because Duncan and Harold made up temporarily and Courtney and Beth formed a girls alliance, I've got to say, no one got eliminated and the friendships that were made in this episode ended up going nowhere, so it's definitely not all that important and it kind of makes this season a bit longer. Like, I don't think the stuff that happened in this episode really needed a full episode. In the end, this episode is gonna get an F. Episode 23, 2008, A Space Owen. Space themed challenges. The first challenge was spending the night on a space shuttle. I didn't like the first challenge, but there was a funny scene after this when Chef was touching Owen's butt thinking that it was pillows. But the second part of this challenge was awesome with the vomit comment. Also, Harold accidentally ending Duncan's pet tarantula was funny. In classic Courtney fashion, she chickened out of the challenge because she only wants to play on easy mode, but saw no consequences as Harold got eliminated, and now there's no one left that would be a satisfying winner. This episode is a roller coaster, so it's gonna get a B. The Harold elimination was sour. Episode 24, Top Dog. Animal themed challenges. Courtney gave Duncan this 32-page letter on how to act if he wants to be with her. Just take Gwen. Anyways, yeah, first it was an animal buddy challenge, train up an animal. Then they went back to Camp Wawanakwa and they had to use their animal buddies to help them get out of the forest. Beth won this challenge, which affects how I feel about the end of this season. Also, Courtney's downfall was fun to watch. In the awards ceremony, both Courtney and Owen left, 2 characters that I don't like, and by getting rid of both of them, it fast forwards to the final 2, the finale, instead of taking up another filler episode to get rid of a mole and Owen, not even a real player. Big dubs for getting rid of both of them in this episode. This episode is actually going to get an A. Episode 25, Mutiny on the Soundstage. It's the final challenge, a showdown between Beth and Duncan. No one would have expected Beth to make it after going out so early last season, and Duncan gets a shot at redemption because he got robbed last season. Also, there was this Chris and Chef feud in this episode where they switched jobs and that was a thing. I like how Duncan and Beth had different paths because at a certain point in the challenge, they had to answer a question and if they got it right, they could skip that section, but if they got it wrong, they had to complete some physical task that would slow them down. Beth knew the answers to some of those trivia questions, but Duncan didn't, forcing him to go physical. But in the end, they both got Courtney questions wrong. The one that Beth got asked about the name of Courtney's band was reasonable. But the question that Duncan got asked, what color is Courtney thinking of, robbed him. He probably wins right then and there if he gets a legit question. But it doesn't matter because Beth and Duncan are gonna teamsies it to the end and run into the aftermath show set. The challenge was amazing and the episode was good all the way up until they asked that Courtney question. Now that's just a way to extend the season. I didn't like that, but in the end, this episode won't get anything lower than a B. B is a fair grade for it. Episode 26, The Aftermath 4. Without Chris there and Duncan and Beth being tied, everyone's gonna try and come up with a way to break the tie until Chris showed up. And there was a jury vote to decide the winner. This episode was lame. Nothing really matters until the jury vote, which for Total Drama is anticlimactic. It's probably why they never went back to the jury vote system, as it's not as suspenseful and action-packed as a legitimate final challenge. Also, this season was one that could have gone for a single winner instead of two winners. This basically means that none of the relationships and jury management matter if they're both going to win. For my winner, I have Beth. At least Beth won some challenges. Duncan won 0 individual challenges, wasn't necessarily a strategist, and kind of just coasted to get to where he was. Also, his jury management was horrible, which matters for this season because the season ended in a jury vote. Duncan is one of my favorite characters, but his win is terrible, and there's players that have played better losing games, showed more ability in losing games than Duncan in his winning game. With that out of the way, I've got to give this episode an F. The finale would have been better if it ended with that challenge in the previous episode. Episode 27, Celebrity Manhunts Total Drama Reunion Special. This episode is an introduction to new faces like Alejandro and Sierra before their season airs. But yeah, this episode is basically about the original Total Drama cast getting replaced and them trying to stop that from happening. The chaos alone gets this episode an A. It's such a fun episode. Also, I never saw this as a kid, so it explains a decent amount about Alejandro and Sierra, because for me, they just got on the show out of nowhere. Now it makes sense. Also, they made the right call on the world tour cast. Most of the folks that they shaved off were randoms. Total Drama Action was such a roller coaster of a season. It was bad in the beginning with Gwen, Trent, and Duncan taking up all of the screen time with such a terrible storyline, and I just didn't like how Gwen went out there. Then there was a stretch from like episode 8 to episode 11 where it was middle tier Total Drama. That stretch was kind of a roller coaster itself, but it really hit the ground running in episodes 12 through 20, the best stretch of this season, just to fall off a cliff in episode 21. They had bad eliminations, like the way that Harold and especially Lindsay went out. Lazy. I also didn't like the return of Owen and his terrible mole plot when the show could have gone without it. Also, the pacing was an issue. There were 2 episodes spent on the final 4 round and 2 episodes spent on the final 2 round. Like, the season just drags on sometimes. Also, the challenges were really hit or miss, and some of the storylines were uninteresting or didn't really matter that much. A big one being DJ and Chef's alliance. Also, the villains were bad. Justin's not that interesting and Courtney's annoying. Total Drama Action was a very flawed season, and that's where I'm gonna leave it. Total Drama World Tour, episode 1 and 2, Walk Like an Egyptian. Come Fly With Us is my favorite song in the series and was really the highlight of that first episode. Also, the challenges in these episodes were definitely a step up from Action. They're more adventurous, which can be said for just about all of the challenges in this season. Sad to see Duncan go here, and Ezekiel. Maybe he could have been something if they actually gave him a chance, but yeah, both are A episodes. Great way to start off the season. Episode 3, Super Crazy Happy Fun Time Japan. I just didn't like this episode because of the challenges. The game show challenge was alright, but they completely lost me at the challenge where they had to make a commercial for fishtails. Also, DJ and Harold on the chopping block. Really? It's the battle of mid. I like the song in this episode, Before We Die, so that's some positivity, but that's not going to save this episode from getting an F. Episode 4, Yukon episode. Really, this episode was the Alejandro show. It was mostly about Alejandro just absolutely playing Bridget and getting her voted out. This episode is an easy A. Episode 5, Broadway, baby. They went to New York in this one. The atmosphere was great. The song, What's Not to Love, was great. And the gameplay was great, especially from Alejandro. He saw that Sierra was Chris's favorite. He saw that Heather was trying to get in on that so she could get the game rigged for her again. And he put an end to all of that, totally manipulating Sierra into ruining her relationship with Chris and sabotaging Heather's plans. Also, for the challenges, there wasn't one standout, but they were good as a collective, so this episode is going to get an A. Episode 6, Total Drama World Tour, Aftermath 1. It's a whole episode of Bridget apologizing to Jeff for kissing Alejandro on national, international TV. A fun moment in here was when Bridget got memed on by a fan. A crazy moment was when Jeff got back with Bridget when there's plenty of fish in the sea. Not some bad options on his own cast, but he got back with someone that basically cheated on him. This episode was mid, but Bridget singing I'm Sorry is going to move this episode up to an A-. Episode 7, Slap Slap Revolution. In this episode, they went to the German Alps. There was a lot of fun in this episode. I remember Noah was laughing at Cody. He was like, haha, Cody's got a tiny sausage. And then Cody's like, well, at least my team has a sausage. Also, the song Einklein was good, not Sierra's German song. It was funny when Lindsay remembered Tyler's name and he screamed and caused an avalanche. The dance-off was good, especially when Lashana beat the mess out of Heather. Finally, although I don't have a problem with this, I've got to say that they became friends in Total Drama Action, and this episode kind of just ignores their growth in action, or maybe they've changed their mind. I don't know. But I don't care about action that much, so it doesn't matter. And last, Alejandro got Lashana eliminated here. She got robbed in Island, but dang, every season she just gets worse. But yeah, easily an A tier episode. Episode 8, the Amazon race. In this episode, they went to the Amazon for a race and Team Amazon got cursed. They got captured, but it was all fake. I didn't really like the gypsy rap from Team Amazon. On top of that, their storyline wasn't that interesting. I would have liked to see more focus on the challenge than them, so this episode is going to get a C. Episode 9, Can't Help Falling in Love. In this episode, they went to Paris where they had to reassemble some statues. My favorite part of this section was DJ's plot, with him trying to break the curse and take the artifact back to Egypt just for Izzy to break it. The first half was solid, but I could have gone without the fashion challenge. It was boring, plus Lindsay left in this episode when DJ wanted to get voted out. She didn't play as good of a game as she played in action, but she's still a fun character, so seeing her go out here over a malcontent was tough. I'm going to give this episode a B-. Episode 10, Noof Kids on the Rock. They went to Newfoundland and competed in some challenges for reward, but the bigger storyline was Alejandro and Heather competing, trying to get DJ and their alliance so they could have the numbers. That was more fun than the challenges. Also, this episode had one of the best songs in the season in the Sea Shanty mix. It's a B+ episode. Episode 11, Jamaica Me Sweat. In this episode, Owen and Izzy got crushed by the plane, causing Izzy to get medevaced from the game. So there goes my favorite, but I like the song. Oh My Izzy is in my top 5 World Tour songs. The challenges were also good fun. One of them was a treasure hunt, and the other one was this bobsled challenge where the best part was just how Alejandro crafted DJ's exit, completely sabotaging him in the challenge. This is an A episode, Alejandro Masterclass. Episode 12, Total Drama World Tour, Aftermath 2. It was about the Aftermath crew and the eliminated contestants trying to raise money to get the plane back in the air after it crashed in the previous episode. A funny moment in here was when no one wanted to see Lashana dance. She's not that good. Also, I liked when Brainzilla turned back into Izzy and blew up the bomb. This episode was kind of mid, but I liked how it had an impact on the game, unlike Total Drama Action Aftermath shows that just felt distant from everything. This episode is gonna get a B. Episode 13, I See London. In this episode, the contestants had to try and catch Jack the Ripper. Jack ended up being Ezekiel. I like this mystery style of challenge and how the players were getting picked off one by one as time went on. I'm not going to point to one team that carried this episode. They were all good as a collective. Also, although the song Strip Them Down isn't in my top 10, it's a solid listen. Also, Duncan got back in the game. Courtney and Gwen captured him and brought him back, but it was near the end of this episode, so he won't have a big impact on this episode. I like Duncan and didn't mind him coming back, but I gotta admit that he's reaching screen hog territories. Final Four in Island, finalist in Action, and now he's back in this season, taking up Noah's screen time. Noah was the third person eliminated in Island, didn't compete in Action, and was actually having a decent run in Total Drama World Tour until he got swapped out for Duncan, an already established great Total Drama character, so that's kind of rough. But in the end, this is an A tier episode. Episode 14, Greece's Pieces. They went to Greece and competed in Olympic themed challenges. This was an episode that was more about the relationships and drama rather than the challenges, considering that this was the episode right after Gwunkin kissed. The song that Gwunkin sang, Fight for the Gold, was nice. They have more chemistry and are just a better pair than Duncan and Courtney. Also, Alejandro getting Tyler to expose that Gwunkin kissed led to so much drama. Although Gwen is one of my favorites, so it was tough to see her be in the crosshairs and get all of the blame. Actually, I slowed the clip down and it turns out that in the previous episode, Duncan went in for the kiss first, but he gets no blame because Tyler was the only one that saw it and didn't really specify. Also, Courtney's whining in this episode was annoying. Duncan, so clingy. Like, she went back to her Total Drama Action self. Like, Duncan brings out the worst in her. But it's not like it's over nothing. Gwen was wrong. In the end, this chaotic episode is going to get an A-. Episode 15, The X-Files. In this episode, the teams broke into Area 51 and stole alien artifacts. The first one back wins. This was another episode where the challenges weren't bad at all. Area 51 was one of my favorite locations and the challenges were solid, but all of that was secondary to the relationships and drama. Duncan and Gwen finally embraced being together with nothing holding them back. I like them way more than Duncan, but most of this episode was revenge. Courtney tried to sabotage the challenge to vote Gwen out. Also, Courtney's finally giving some blame to Duncan and trying to make him jealous by hanging out with Tyler, which is all part of Alejandro's masterful gameplay. Although I didn't like Courtney's boyfriend kisser song, it's very low on my list. That's the only negative for this episode, so it's gonna get an A-. Episode 16, Picnic at the Hanging Dork. They went to Australia and competed in some challenges such as emu racing and bungee jumping sheep shearing. I like the bungee jumping challenge, but yet again, this is another episode about the relationships. Gwen and Courtney had votes against the other in Cody and Sierra, respectively, so they were both trying to get Heather's vote as a swing vote to pack the other one up. Good thing that Heather told Courtney not to throw the challenge. I don't like when players try to lose on purpose. Definitely not the end of that in Total Drama. So Courtney and Gwen had that going on, but the better storyline was Alejandro and Duncan teaming up to dismantle Team Amazon, just playing mind games on Courtney and Heather, really getting the upper hand. All good until it led to Gwen getting eliminated. I just don't like Courtney. This episode is going to get a B. It was chaotic, but also a bit confusing at times. There's a lot of drama going on, so yeah. Episode 17, Sweet and Sour. In this episode, they went to Sweden, they had to build a ship and play a capture the flag game. These challenges were solid. For the storylines, Cody was sad because Gwen left, and rightfully so. She was such a good character. Also, Heather was jealous of Alejandro flirting with Courtney. And last, Duncan was trying to get Owen on his side because Noah said that Alejandro was evil, so that was the thing. This episode is a B-. This was a weaker episode of Total Drama World Tour. The numbers were starting to get a bit thin with 7 contestants left. Also, it was a non-elim, and it's like nothing really materialized from these plot points in this episode, so yeah. B-. Episode 18, Total Drama World Tour Aftermath 3. In this episode, Bridget got taken away and stranded by Blaney, which caused Jeff to go off on her in the song Her Real Name Isn't Blaney, one of the best songs of this season. Also, this episode was about the Total Drama Second Chance Challenge, in which Blaney accidentally won. I wanted to see Lindsay get back in the game, but I'm fine with this because Blaney is a new character. But yeah, this is what I was talking about when I said that aftermath shows in World Tour are more relevant than the ones in Action. Actions are skippable for the most part, but Blaney got in the game through this aftermath show. It's important to watch this to know how she got in the game. The aftermath shows are just more intertwined with the game in this season. This episode is going to get a B+. Episode 19, Niagara Brawls. In this episode, Blaney finally joined the game. So for the challenges, they got paired up, boy, girl, boy, girl. For the first challenge, the girls were blindfolded and the guys had to give directions and lead them to their wedding dress. In the second challenge, they had to tightrope walk over Niagara Falls. A big storyline here was Sierra trying to get married to Cody. It was alright, but it didn't really add anything major or take anything away from this episode. Also, I like the song Blainerific. My favorite moment in the song is when Heather and Courtney were making fun of Blaney. Rare Courtney W. Also, I gotta say, Owen, audience favorite, that would explain why he's such a screen hog. Alejandro got rid of him for that reason and outplayed Duncan, picking off his allies. I'm gonna have to give this episode a C+. Same thing I said in the last episode about the cast getting a bit smaller. Also, these weren't the best set of challenges that this season had to offer, and the storylines were alright, but that's it. The only thing about this episode that was a real positive is Blainerific, so yeah, it's gonna get a C+. Episode 20, Chinese Fake Out. In this episode, they went to China. A big storyline for this episode was Chris being an even more irresponsible host because he kept on taking phone calls. The first challenge was a race. Duncan versus Alejandro was fun, so was Blaney's chaos, but the episode slowed down a bit in the second challenge, literally because they were coming off of a race. But the second challenge was a gross food eating challenge that was highlighted by Blaney and Alejandro's cheating. What wasn't a highlight was the song, A Chinese Lesson. It just doesn't rank high on my list. Sadly, Blaney gets eliminated here, which is unfortunate because I really liked her as a player. But in the end, this episode is gonna get a B-. It's solid. Episode 21, African Lion Safari. In this episode, they went to Tanzania. The first challenge was a soccer and cricket challenge. A funny moment was when Alejandro kicked a soccer ball at Heather and missed, and Heather said, "I knew he wouldn't kick a ball at his crush, just for it to turn around and hit her." That was some good fun. But the best part of this episode was the second challenge, the wild animal or Ezekiel Safari. I like the song Wake Up, especially when Heather was singing. Also, the gameplay was nice. A lot of wheeling and dealing, looking around for alliances, but the winning combination was Heather and Alejandro, one of my favorite pairings. They got together and destroyed Duncan and got him eliminated from the game. That was a fun elimination. This episode is going to get a B+. Misses out on the A because the first challenge wasn't that amazing. Episode 22, Rapa Nui. They went to Easter Island in this episode. A main storyline for this episode was Alejandro versus Heather. They were trying to butter up Cody and Sierra respectively to get them on their side to vote the other one out. So yeah, those were the pairs for this episode. Alejandro and Cody, Heather and Sierra. The challenges were an egg hunt and climbing up to a condor nest and giving the eggs back. Some fun moments came from the first part of the challenge when they were trying to get the eggs out of these statues that looked like the eliminated contestants, and everyone was taking out their frustrations on the statues, like Cody calling Duncan's statue a Gwen stealer, and Heather getting mad at Lashana's statue because she dropped her egg on it. In the end, this episode is going to get a B. It's as good as a non-elimination episode with such a limited cast can be. Speaking of a limited cast, it gets some points taken away because now Sierra's Cody obsession is in the spotlight. There's more time for it. And in this episode, it's the worst it's ever been so far. I really don't like Sierra, so that's why this episode is a B rather than a B+. Episode 23, Aw Drumheller. In this episode, Alejandro created a fake picture of Heather sleeping with Cody to show Sierra, still trying to get Heather out of the game. They just can't stop going after each other, and this was yet again another big storyline. For the first challenge, they had to make a dinosaur. Everyone clowned on Cody's dinosaur because it was made of something nasty. The second challenge was them trying to find a barrel of oil and bring it back. Heather got stuck under a rock and Alejandro sang this amazing song, "This Is How We Will End It," and ended up saving Heather because he likes her. Didn't ensure her loyalty because Heather voted him out. Luckily for Alejandro, Sierra blew up the plane and got caught in the explosion, sustaining some injuries and getting kicked out of the game. This episode is going to get a B. Like I keep on saying, there's a limit to how good these episodes can be with such a limited cast, but this episode was as good as it could be for only having 4 contestants, so yeah, B. Episode 24, Total Drama World Tour Aftermath 4. In this episode, Bridget finally got back on the show, but she wasn't alone. She came back with this security guard bear, Bruno, that was blocking off all physical contact with her and Jeff. This episode was mainly the players in the peanut gallery competing for an advantage for a person that's still in the game. I'll give this episode a C+. It wasn't really anything spectacular that needed to basically halt the game for an episode. Episode 25. Planes, trains, and hot air mobiles. This episode is a race to Hawaii. Since the plane got blown up, the contestants had to find another mode of transportation. I'm Gonna Make It was such a good song, especially Heather and Alejandro's opening verses. Also, big W for Heather making it to the final 2 and getting some redemption after that tragic way that she went out in Island when she was right there. This was a fun episode, so it's gonna get a B+. Episode 26, Hawaiian Punch. First off, they broke the tie and got rid of floater Cody. It's great that he didn't make the final 2 because he's not an amazing player and he just floated the entire game, barely did anything. For the final challenge, Heather and Alejandro had to make a sacrifice, race to the top of the volcano, and throw it in. Versus has always been one of my favorite World Tour songs. 2 of the best players, best characters, going at it in the finale. Also, the race to the top was solid. I liked how Lindsay was supposed to help Alejandro, but she bailed when Cody mentioned a sale of mascara. Now for the winner, if I want it to be technical, if I want it to be nitpicky, then Alejandro got voted out of the game and only got saved by Sierra blowing up the plane. But in the end, I just like Alejandro's villainous style of game more than Heather's game. He just caused more eliminations than her, and he was a more strategic player than Heather in this season. This episode is gonna get an A. It's one of the best episodes of the season, and it's way better than Action's finale. Total Drama World Tour was a season that started out amazing. They brought back the right characters, like Noah had a solid season after being a non-factor in the first 2 seasons, wasn't even on Action. They had a new character in Alejandro. He was amazing and he was way better than Action's villains. Like the way that he got contestants eliminated was so entertaining. The songs were amazing, especially the one that they started this season off with, Come Fly With Us. Best song in World Tour. Perfect way to start off the season. The aftermath shows were a noticeable upgrade from action. They had more story relevance in this season. Also, I liked when Duncan got back in the game and the drama that he caused. But then it started to fall off in that episode 16 to 17 range when Gwen got eliminated and the cast started getting a bit small. It's a drop off, but it didn't fall off a cliff. Most of those episodes were still good B tier episodes. And the season ended with a bang and 2 satisfying winners. World Tour was a great season of Total Drama. Total Drama Revenge of the Island, Episode 1. Bigger, badder, brutaler. In this episode, all of the original Total Drama contestants came back to Camp Wawanakwa for another action-packed season of Total Drama. Psych! The original cast was actually riding in on a yacht, but they didn't stop at the island. They're not players this season. An all-new cast arrived at Camp Wawanakwa, which is now a radioactive island, which is supposed to be the big twist for this season to differentiate it from season 1 that took place at the same island. Before the challenges started, Chris assigned the teams. He was consistently alternating from Team A to Team B for the most part until he got to Zoe. She went to Team B following Cameron. So since Zoe and Mike got there at the same time, that means Mike's on Team A. But nah, Dawn, that got there after Mike and Zoe, went to Team A, leaving the doors open for Mike to get on Team B. I'm calling it now. All 3 of them, Cameron, Mike, and Zoe, are production pets. Anyways, after that, Chris showed everyone an invincibility statue or a survivor super idol that's going to be in the game now. Funny thing is, I grew up on Total Drama, so I always called the super idol a Total Drama idol before I knew the name. But yeah, it's the same thing. Play it after the votes are read rather than before. For the challenge, they had to cut down a totem and ride it back to the cabins before it blows up. There were some fun moments in here, like Brick acting like a coward, and B just being a genius and carrying his team. One of my favorite characters this season. The rats got to the cabins first, and the maggots accidentally blew up the rats' cabin. So since they were the only ones with a cabin left, the maggots won the challenge, changing up the rules to protect their favorites. In the end, Stacy got voted out here. Even though she was robbed, this was a good thing because she was this generation's Katie, Sadie, or Sierra, and I'm not going for that. This episode is gonna get an A. I like it more than the other season premieres. Usually, they take like 2 episodes to set everything up, like in Total Drama Action. The first elimination had to wait an episode until episode 2, and in Total Drama Island, they didn't even get through the first challenge in the first episode. But this season just hits the ground running, and I like the fast pace. So yeah, A episode. It was a fun episode that got rid of someone that was going to be a bad character. Episode 2. Truth or Laser Shark. In this episode, the teams competed in a truth-telling challenge. If they didn't buzz in on time, they got dunked underwater and exposed to sharks. I actually liked this challenge and wouldn't have minded seeing an episode based around it, but it barely took off because after the first few tries, everyone started complaining, so that was the end of that challenge. The next challenge was a relay race obstacle course. I liked the challenge, but Scott's strategy that took off in this episode just makes the toxic rats so unwatchable. Losing is fine, but losing on purpose is sad. For the storylines, Sam and Dakota bonded a little bit over not having their electronics. Also, Scott got bit by Fang and got his tooth. That's going to be a season-long rivalry. This episode is going to get a B. It's a solid episode. Episode 3. Ice Ice Baby. For the challenges, they had to race to the top of Mount Looming Tragedy, and the second challenge was a Capture the Snow Fort challenge. These were 2 really good challenges, but sadly, this is like a farewell B episode where he got to show his brilliance in the first and second challenge until Scott ruined his plan in the second challenge and got him voted out. B is one of my favorite characters, so it was tough to watch. There were some other side plots like Dawn, taming the beetle, and Mike's multiple personalities being used to help his team, but also Anne Maria developed a crush on Vito here, which will be important in future episodes. Also, at the end, Dakota's intern arc started, but the main story was B versus Scott, and Scott came out victorious. This episode is actually going to get an A. I didn't like the end result, but the challenges were really good. Episode 4, Finders Creepers. In this episode, the challenge was a scavenger hunt at night. It's just a singular challenge, which I like. In seasons like Total Drama Action and World Tour, they went for this quantity over quality approach, which usually meant that one challenge was going to be mid. So I like this sort of throwback to Island where they had a lot of singular challenges. A big storyline here was how Anne Maria and Vito's romance started to take off. She kissed Vito to get him motivated for a challenge, and Zoe was like, huh? Get your lips off him, but she can't even be mad. Like, she's not going out with Mike. He's a free agent. Something that I liked other than the challenge was how Izzy was the spider that was picking everyone off. Izzy is my favorite character. Also, I like how this starts the trend of previous Total Drama contestants coming back to be part of challenges. Now, some things that I didn't like about this episode was how the toxic rats got picked off so quickly, and it was just Sam and Scott for most of this episode. I don't like Sam. Also, when the maggots finally lost, there was no elimination. Brick just switched teams. It's shaping up to be another unbalanced season. In the end, this episode is a B. Episode 5, Backstabbers Ahoy. The first challenge was diving underwater to get some water skis. Bridget was the surprise guest for this challenge. The second challenge was a water ski race where they had to be the first one to ring 4 bells. In the first challenge, there was a fun moment in there when Zoe was standing on the air hose, cutting off Joe's air underwater, and Anne Maria was like, hey, get off the air hose, bozo, and pushed Zoe, and Zoe actually hit her, but somehow she has this super nice reputation. Also, there was another Anne Maria and Vito makeout session that caused Zoe to get upset. Zoe was dumb before All Stars. I'm not saying that it's obvious that Mike has multiple personality disorders specifically, but at this point, she's got to know that something's up. The second challenge was actually solid outside of Scott throwing it. That just ruins the rat side. Scott listened in on Dawn's confessional, saying she's going to expose him. Then Scott got the jump on her, framing Dawn for stealing everyone's stuff, leading to Dawn's elimination. I wasn't really a big fan of Dawn, but she was the most likable person on Team Rat, so it's tough to see her go out here this early, but hey, that's just Total Drama. In the end, this episode will get an A-. It's entertaining. Episode 6, Runaway Model. The first challenge in this episode was a fashion contest. They had to catch an animal and dress it up to be judged by Lindsay. She's the classic competitor that was in this episode, one of my favorite characters, so that was good. But the episode really gets good when Lindsay got kidnapped by the Yeti and they had to quit the challenge to save her. There was a fun moment when Sam turned saving Lindsay into a Donkey Kong arcade game. Also, there was another fun moment when Chester messed up Joe's makeup, making her look like a clown, and she got clowned on by Lindsay and the Yeti. Also, this is the episode where Scott started working on Zoe, buttering her up for when they get to merge. Although it didn't lead to an elimination, this episode was yet another Maggot win, and with Scott throwing challenges and Team Maggot just being a better team, this is becoming a steamroll. Luckily, it was just a team swap. Scott goes to Maggots, Joe goes to Rats. This episode is going to get an A. Episode 7, A Mine is a terrible thing to waste. In this episode, they got kidnapped by Chef and taken to a mine. They had to go into a mine and find one of those golden Chris statues from Total Drama Action and bring it out of the mine. They were also carrying these bombs on their back so they could blow up the mine and seal off all of the toxic waste. Scott was still trying to throw challenges, which actually would have been good to see because the Maggots are a super team. Like, go to an elimination ceremony. But Brick just couldn't leave a man behind, sacrificing to win to save Mike, Zoe, and Cameron, leading to him getting voted off, which I didn't like. He's one of my favorites. Also in this episode, Cameron and Mike made this little deal. He's going to try and help Mike control his multiple personality disorder, which is going to become a storyline for future episodes. This episode gets an A. It was a fun episode, especially when Joe and Lightning were going back and forth. Episode 8, The Treasure Island of Dr. McClane. This was the Dakotazoid episode where she turned into a mutant, but it's not really her episode because she was a side character. The first challenge was swimming back to shore because they got stranded out at the ocean. The second challenge was to find Gwen and Sam. They got buried alive, which is a nice callback to season 1. Gwen's fear was being buried alive. The main storylines were Scott trying to gain Zoe's trust and Cameron trying to hold on to Mike's secret until he gave up his secret to Scott, which will be important in the next episode. Also, Scott saved himself from getting voted out with the invincibility idol, sending Dakotazoid and Sam home. This is a B episode. It's solid, but there's nothing that really stands out and makes it amazing. Episode 9, Grand Chef Otto. It's the merge episode, which is nice because the teams last episode were really unbalanced. Joe and Lightning versus the world. The challenge was a go-kart race where they had to mark some landmarks. Duncan came back for this to demo the challenge, but he escaped and blew up Chris's face mountain. Classic Duncan. But this episode was all about Scott blackmailing Mike now that he knows his secret. He started out under the radar, now he's fully embracing his villainy, and everyone knows this. The thing is, this blackmailing ended up not really mattering in the end because Mike eventually told Zoe about his multiple personality disorder, which means that all of that work he did for Scott was for nothing, and he still got eliminated here. I wanted to give this episode a good rating because the title sounds nice, but aside from Duncan blowing up Chris's face mountain, there was nothing really amazing about this episode, so it's gonna get a C+. Episode 10, Up, Up, and Away in My Pitiful Balloon. In this episode, the contestants competed in aerial-based challenges. The first challenge was just building a mode of flight. Nothing too interesting happened there, but the episode picked up in the second half when Heather took over the Zeppelin and threatened to steal the million, so the challenge shifted to stopping her. She's the best villain on a season that she's not even competing in. In the end, Cameron won invincibility and Joe got eliminated. Thank you. She lasted way too long. This episode is gonna get a B-. Heather really brings this episode up from a C. Episode 11, Eat Puke and Be Wary. Chris got stuck in the bathroom, so Chef hosted the challenges. In the first challenge, they were supposed to make food for DJ to judge, but the stuff that they made was so nasty that they had to eat their own food. Still makes no sense how Cameron didn't notice that Scott stole his quiche. Cameron's was normal and Scott's was toxic green. Anyways, in the second challenge, they got hunted by Chef. Those style of challenges always seem to be up Chef's alley, especially in Island. This episode starts the Commando Zoe revenge arc, which I like. That's a positive for this episode. But in the end, the vote doesn't make sense. Why are you voting out Scott here when he's in a wheelchair and Lightning's right there? This episode is going to get a B-. It's okay. Episode 12, The Enchanted Frankenforest. In this episode, the final three had to race through a forest and get to the end with a certain flower. This episode really focused on Zoe's change to Commando Zoe, and it paints her in a bad light, but I actually like how she became more of an alpha. Although I have to say that it's ironic how she got mad at having to save Cameron a lot when she herself got saved by Mike a lot. In the end, no friendship finale. Zoe snapped out of her commando mode to save Cameron from being eaten, and Lightning ended up winning because they didn't vote him out in the last episode when he was a complete sitting duck. So because of that, because of his invincibility win, he sends Zoe home. This episode is a B-. It's solid, but there's just not enough characters for it to be amazing. Episode 13, Brains vs. Brawn. The Ultimate Showdown. The finale was a gladiator royale between Cameron and Lightning where they got to craft their own armor and weaponry. Cameron made a super suit and Lightning made some ramshackle weaponry. The fight actually ended up being solid. In the end, Lightning got struck by lightning and his hair turned white. For my winner, I can tell that they were pushing for Cameron not only in this episode but for the whole season. Like, they tried to make him likable and Lightning a villain. But I don't like underdogs at all, so I say Cameron is the winner, but I prefer Lightning. This finale was definitely better than Action's finale, so yeah, this episode is going to get an A rating. When I was younger, Total Drama Revenge of the Island was a season that I wrote off because it was different. It didn't have that original Gen 1 cast that I was used to. But this season is actually solid. They went back to the original camp and didn't reuse much. Like, it didn't feel like I'm watching Total Drama Island 2.0. This felt like its own unique season. Also, another thing that I liked about Revenge is that 13 episode format, but it is a double-edged sword. Sometimes plots get rushed, they don't get a whole 26 episode season to develop, so sometimes episodes are just jam-packed with plot lines that could have been spread out. But I like 13 episodes because it's easier for binging and it makes every episode have a heightened sense of importance. There were legitimately some episodes in action that were either filler or whatever the plot was for those episodes just didn't need a full episode. Can't say the same for Revenge. This is actually a good season. Total Drama All-Stars, Episode 1, Heroes vs. Villains. First off, I've got to say, this is the season when they started shortening the theme song to make the episodes longer. Understandable, but nothing beats the full intro. Anyways, this season is going to be an All-Stars Heroes vs. Villains season. 2 for the price of 1. I'm going to use this time to talk about some of the casting picks for this season. The second generation cast is actually solid. The only thing that I didn't like was Sam being in there over Brick or maybe even B. But yeah, other than Sam, the second generation cast is good. But first generation, First off, Heather, Alejandro, Duncan, and Gwen all made a final 2, which means that by total drama rules and how the seasons go, they might as well just be eliminated off rip. They're not in contention to win because there's no 2-time winners. Combine them with Cameron and Lightning, and that's 6 players, a little under half of the 14-player cast that have no chance to win. Another thing about Gen 1, not that I wanted him in, but I'm surprised that Owen wasn't included in here considering how much of a screen hog he was, especially in action. But a pick that I didn't like was Sierra over Lashana. That's a more indefensible pick than Sam over Brick or B. Also, the way that the teams got divided up was actually solid, except for Courtney on Heroes and Gwen on Villains. In Island, Courtney and Duncan stole some food from Chef and Chris. In action, she had the game rigged for her, which robbed a bunch of deserving players of the money. She's a bona fide villain. Definitely more of a villain than Gwen. And that's what I have to say about the picks. For the challenge, they had to dive underwater, grab a key, then ride in a baby carriage to the hotel to see if it would unlock. There were some mini stories, but the one that got the most focus was that Duncan, Courtney, and Gwen love triangle drama, and Gwen trying to make it up to Courtney in the end of this episode. There's going to be a lot more of that storyline throughout the season. In the end, Lindsay ends up leaving in an unfair elimination, just like all of her eliminations. This time, Courtney put her in charge of racing the baby carriage and she was bad at it. That should fall on Courtney, although I've got to say that this is the most fair Lindsay elimination because even though she didn't volunteer for the challenge, she's dead weight. Probably not going to be useful in an all-star season. I'm going to give this episode a B. This episode just felt all over the place, which is going to stop it from being an A. Episode 2, Evil Dread. There were a lot of storylines in this episode. That Gwen, Courtney, and Duncan love triangle was one of them. This is when Gwen started ignoring Duncan and trying to repair her relationship with Courtney. Alejandro had to try and keep his secret that his legs weren't asleep. Joe versus Heather was also a fun rivalry. I was on the Heather side. The Mal arc started in this episode when Mike got hit in the head with a shovel by Scott, awakening Mike's evil personality, Mal, and putting a block on all of his other personalities. And this episode was just lightning embarrassment. He was dumb in Revenge of the Island, but it just got dialed up so much here, and it was obvious that he was going home. I like 13 episode seasons for binge watching, but I have to admit that this episode had a bit too many storylines to keep up with, and just like the first episode, it just went all over the place to different plots. Nothing got the shine that it would have got had the season been a bit longer. That's going to keep this episode from being great. In the end, it's still a fine B- episode. Episode 3, Saving Private Leechball. It was a paintball challenge with leeches. The storylines were Joe, Heather, and Alejandro fighting for Gwen to be in their separate alliances, which didn't really go anywhere in this episode. Also, Sierra started liking Cam Cody in this episode, but the biggest one was Duncan and Courtney switching teams, which is good because Courtney was always a villain, and she showed why in this episode when she used Sam as a leech shield. But this is going to start an arc where Duncan goes soft and just can't be bad anymore. In the end, I'll give this episode a B. It was solid, but there wasn't really anything amazing about it to give it an A. Episode 4, Food Fright. Some storylines for this episode were Scott and Courtney beginning to like each other, Duncan starting to question Mal, thinks that he sounds familiar, and the last storyline was the usual Gwen trying to gain Courtney's trust and Courtney doubting her. Most of the episode took place at this pancake obstacle course challenge, which was a solid challenge, but that's about it. There was very little gaming going on, and even the plots that I talked about were very secondary to this challenge and only got explored for maybe a few seconds, except for the Gwen and Courtney plot. The best thing that I can say about this episode is that Sam got eliminated. He was a questionable pick going in and just didn't deliver much in this season. In the end, although there weren't many positives, there also wasn't anything atrocious, so it's gonna get a B- rating. Episode 5, Moon Madness. For the challenge, they had to race through the forest at night with the blue harvest moon affecting the animals, turning the good ones into dangerous ones. There were two main storylines. One of them was Mal. Zoe noticed that Mike tripped Cameron and told Cameron about this, so folks are starting to notice that something is up with Mike. Also, Mal got really awakened by the blue harvest moon and took control of Mike for a stretch and started causing a lot of chaos, with his main victim being Cameron. The other plotline was Gwen, Courtney, Duncan. Duncan wanted to know what Courtney thinks about him, making Gwen so mad that she ended it with him in this episode. Also, Courtney spent a decent amount of this episode being mad at Gwen, saying she's trying to sabotage the challenge on purpose for not wanting to cross a sketchy looking rope bridge. But then, when Courtney got across the bridge, she destroyed the bridge, taking away a potential pathway for Gwen to get to the end, which doesn't paint Courtney in the best light. Also, she was so unappreciative when Gwen saved her from that deer. Like, this episode makes Courtney so unlikable. Not quite like in Total Drama Action, but it's still bad. Courtney's really gonna drag this episode down. Also, the challenge wasn't that interesting, so yeah, C+ episode. Episode 6, No One Expects the Spanish Opposition. For the challenge, they went to the fun zone and had to look for eggs to put in their team's basket. The biggest storylines were Duncan just losing his edge. Like in this episode, they just had to drill it in that Duncan is good. Also, the other big plotline was Heather versus Alejandro, where Heather made this alliance with Alejandro, but immediately started throwing him under the bus, rallying up the votes to get him out. Probably thought that she was protected by the invincibility statue that she found in this episode, but Alejandro took the statue and used it against her to get her voted out. He even revealed that he could always walk normally, which will definitely hurt him in future episodes. Their storyline was fun. Then there were these other smaller stories like Mal taking full control, Duncan recognizing what Mal was whistling and realizing that he knew Mal from Juvie. Also, when it was time for the votes, Courtney told Gwen where to vote so they could rekindle their friendship. In the end, this is a B+ episode. Good guy Duncan stops this episode from being an A. They're ruining a good character and putting it front and center, so yeah, B+. Episode 7, Suckers Punched. In this episode, Duncan told Zoe about Mal, so now this information is starting to get around. For the challenge, everyone had to fight against their fears or something that would create a lot of drama. Heroes started out with a 1-0 lead because of an advantage that Zoe won in the last challenge. Also, she didn't have to compete in the challenge and expose one of her fears. Now, Zoe is one of my favorites, but I've got to admit, she's becoming a little too perfect, and it's not the first time something like this happened. In Revenge, she didn't have to reveal one of her secrets in Truth or Laser Shark because the challenge ended early. Just gotta point this stuff out. Anyways, Alejandro slaying the dragon, his brother Jose, was fun, especially since this dated back to World Tour. The reason why he doesn't like being called Al was because of Jose, so that was a fun fight. The rest weren't, like Duncan having to fight a bird, but he couldn't, out of kindness, just turning him into even more of a joke. Also, I didn't like Mal beating up Izzy, my favorite character. Definitely wasn't happy to see her lose. Also, Gwen and Courtney rekindled their friendship for the most part. Chris tried to break it up by making them fight, but it was a fail. Also, Sierra got eliminated, so big dubs. There was some good and some bad in this episode. I'll just give it a B-. Episode 8. You were gotta be kidding me. First off, I've gotta say that at the end of last episode, a little bit before Sierra got voted out, Chris made it a big point to say that the teams weren't merging. Then, like 4 minutes into this episode, he said that the teams are merging. What? What was the point of that? Like, I've always thought that that was kind of weird and pointless. Anyways, the challenge was a boat race. A funny moment was when Alejandro's boat broke down and Courtney said, I guess he'll have to row his boat. First time she's ever made me laugh. But after that, this episode just goes downhill. First, the Mal plot. Zoe saw Mal trip Cameron. She was even told by Duncan that he knows Mal from Juvie. But all of that just went out of the window when Mike/Mal saved her from some piranhas. Even though he took a long time to get there, and after this, he didn't want to help Cameron. Mal was acting so sketchy, but Zoe was just painfully gullible in this episode. That's not even the worst plot. That goes to Duncan. His downfall was painful to watch. He started out this episode being a joke just like usual until he found Chris's cottage and blew it up, which got him arrested. He was a disappointment this season and I didn't like the way that he went out. It's a bad send-off to cap off a bad arc that just ruined him in this season. Also, after Duncan got eliminated, they had a vote. Mal tampered with the votes and got all of them on Cameron, but no elimination because Duncan already left, so it made no sense for them to even have the vote in the first place. Easy F. This episode is such a train wreck. Episode 9, Zeke and Ye Shall Find. In this episode, Chris got captured by Ezekiel, so the contestants went into the mines to find him. Couple of things to unpack here. Alejandro found Mal's greatest hits and learned that Mal tried to frame him for the Cameron vote, so he reversed it and framed Mike. That's one of my favorite Alejandro moments. Absolute masterclass. Scott and he got together in this episode. Definitely not my favorite couple. Also, imagine Gwen spent all season trying to rekindle her friendship with Courtney just for Courtney to ditch her for Scott in this episode. Not a good look for Courtney. Luckily, this Scottney relationship got broken up when Mal got Cameron to kiss Courtney. Scottney was never quite the same after this, but I've got to say that the most egregious part of this episode is Cameron. He got stuck hanging, and when Alejandro asked him if he wanted some help, he said that he only trusted Zoe and Mike when he shouldn't trust Mike. He already had a decent amount of evidence against Mike, and even in this episode, Mike showed that he's devious by getting Cameron to kiss Courtney. Mike just doesn't play like that. This isn't as bad as Zoe being so gullible last episode, but it's still tough to watch. Also, Cameron got crushed by a bunch of rocks, forcing him to leave the island. That's 2 straight episodes of no real elimination ceremony and no gameplay around it. Like, everyone just got to bypass like 2 rounds. I'm gonna give this episode a D. That Alejandro masterclass saves this episode from getting an F. Episode 10, the obstacle course. Well, it's an obstacle course. The lesser story is about Courtney and Gwen. Gwen found out that Courtney and Cameron kissed. Mixed feelings because I don't know why Gwen would feel a way about them kissing, but also at the same time, Courtney was talking non-stop about Gwen being a boyfriend kisser, but Courtney can't keep her lips to herself, at least from Gwen's perspective. I'm on the Gwen side of things, so I'm fine with this, but I have to say, with this ruining their friendship a bit. Their arc in this season is starting to mean nothing because they're just about back at square one. So that was that, but the biggest story for this episode was Mal versus Al. With Alejandro being the only person that knows Mal's secret, Mal's got to get him off of the island. On the monkey bars, Gwen and Zoe saw Mal torturing Alejandro, but when Alejandro tried to tell Zoe the truth about Mal, she was still on Alejandro, allegedly just leaving Cameron hanging there. She stuck on something that she didn't even see over what she actually saw with her own 2 eyes just a few seconds ago. Mal then convinced Courtney, Scott, and Gwen to vote Alejandro out. They all just kind of went along with everything that Mal said, while Alejandro could barely get a word out. No one really trusted him. This led to him being eliminated. Alejandro was such a good character, but this send-off was bad. I didn't like how everyone just turned into idiots in this episode, and he was basically just a sitting duck. Also, didn't know where to fit this in, but in the challenge, when they were ziplining, Mal wanted to ride with Zoe because their increased weight would make them faster. Okay, so they were going fast, but right when they caught up to Alejandro riding solo, they slowed down, and they were both going at the same speed. But when Mal jumped onto Alejandro's zipline, increasing the weight of his, decreasing the weight of Zoe's zipline, her zipline actually sped up. Just something that I noticed that makes no sense, but yeah, in the end, this episode is an F. Everyone was just painfully dumb in this episode. Episode 11, Sunday Muddy Sunday. The challenge was to race around the island to get the ingredients and toppings for this ice cream that they were making for Chris's interns. Courtney bragged about making the final 5 here and this being the farthest she's ever gone when no, she actually made the final 4/3 in action, really the final 3 because Owen was a mole. The fact that she got that wrong means that even the characters tried to forget about that train wreck of a season. But to be fair to Courtney, maybe she's talking about this being the farthest she's ever gone without cheating because in action she had her lawyers. In this season, she was legit. Anyways, the thing that ruined this episode was the chart. Courtney made this chart of her preferred elimination order, and when Mal somehow got the chart out of nowhere, never got explained how he even got the chart, but yeah, he exposed the chart to everyone, which burnt all of Courtney's bridges. This is kind of like the last episode when it was Alejandro versus the world. In this episode, Courtney was a desperate lone wolf, just trying damage control for most of this episode, but no one was really listening to her. But not to defend her too much, Courtney tried to spin this on Gwen, saying that Gwen should respect her genius. No wonder she has a hard time keeping friends. Like, you literally lied to Gwen's face, saying that you wanted to go to the end with her when your chart said that she was going out at final 3. Also, while you're talking about Gwen having a hard time keeping friends, no one even likes you. Like, Gwen has more friends than Courtney, so it's funny that Courtney would even say that. Gwen and Courtney sort of made up in the beginning of this episode, but that chart ruined their friendship, and I'm going to say this again. What is the point of having this arc if they're just going to end up at square one again, with one hating the other? It's not funny, so it's not providing entertainment. It's just nothing. Also, it's another episode of Zoe being dumb. You see Mike trashing the hotel, being suspicious. You see Mike expose Courtney, which is so out of character for him. Then you say, maybe Courtney is the greater evil that Alejandro was talking about. Facepalm. She's just so oblivious, and it's crazy because Mike has been suspicious for a while now and she's been there to see some of that stuff firsthand, but she thinks that Courtney is the greater evil. Zoe just gets dumber and dumber every episode. Also, I didn't know where to fit this in, but in the race to the finish line, Courtney said that she took a shortcut when they were running on the same path. Just doesn't make any sense. Just like this episode. Easy F. Episode 12, The Bold and the Bootyful. Zoe finally found Mal's greatest hits. Perfect, because I don't know if I could take another episode of her being a clueless idiot. She shouldn't have needed to see all of that footage to know that something's up. Anyways, the challenge was a pirate treasure hunt where the final 4 got assigned an item to bring back. Skipping to the most important storyline, Gwen found her item, which was a Chris painting, but she got dirt on it, so she put some bear feces on it to try and cover it up. She came back with something. Unlike Scott, he came back empty-handed. Also, Mal came back empty-handed, but since he brought back an injured contestant in Scott, that counts as treasure to Chris. So Gwen actually came back with her item, but she got eliminated because Chris got mad that it was covered in something that was undesirable that made him barf. Now, it was a dumb idea to put bear stuff on it, but Chris never said that they had to bring their item back in perfect condition. Zoe's gonna take this challenge. That's 3 in a row. They turned Zoe into such a perfect competitor this season. Anyways, she's gonna vote out Scott at the final 3 because she thinks that if she votes out Mal, she'll never get Mike back. Mal has shown himself to be a better player than Scott, especially in this season. Not gonna lie, gameplay wise, Scott fell off in this season, so this is just contributing to Zoe being a love-struck idiot. This episode is gonna get an F. There's just a lot of gross humor, and I didn't like Gwen's terrible send-off. Episode 13, The Final Reckoning. For the challenge, they had to go up these 3 levels of moats and be the first one to grab a sword that Chef was guarding. Zoe and Mal got to have some teammates for this challenge. Zoe got Gwen and Cameron, Mal got Alejandro and Heather. The rest of the cast that were stuck in these balloons got blown away into the sky by a big gust of wind, which brings up the question, like, what happened to them? Like, did they survive? Anyways, throughout the season, Mike's been walking around in his head, freeing all of his multiple personalities, and this episode was supposed to be the conclusion to this arc. It ends by Mike and his personalities all pressing a reset button. Not gonna lie, that was lame. I was expecting some type of boss fight or something. Also, the reset button is dumb because of what happened last season. Zoe embraced Mike and accepted him after learning about his multiple personality disorder. Seeing Mike thrive with a disorder could have been inspirational to someone that had a disorder or disease. But in this episode, they got rid of his multiple personality disorder and a big part of what makes Mike, Mike. They made him the perfect guy, backtracking on their original message for a worse one. Anyways, eventually everyone got a crack at the money, which didn't matter because the finalists won. Also, all of the helpers were finalists, so that ain't happening. For my winner, it's definitely Zoe. Mike barely even played. Zoe deserved it by far, but that's a problem. She's the only person that deserved it by a large margin. No one else did anything impressive this season, and the gameplay was horrible. It would have been a disappointment if she lost because no one deserved to win this season, but even when she won, it was disappointing because her only gameplay was winning comps, and her win was predictable as she steamrolled the season with very little adversity because everyone on the cast was dumb, including her. In the end, the island sank underwater, and I just have to laugh at this finale. Why are you getting rid of the original island where it all started? That's so lame, and it made this episode feel like a fanfic. Easy F. Total Drama All-Stars was a season that I was always high on, especially since my first and only experience with it was when I was really young. 10-year-old me was just thinking, it's all of my favorite characters, all in one season, like a massive crossover episode. How could it be bad? First off, this wasn't the perfect cast. I'm specifically talking about Sam and Sierra here. Sam barely brought anything to the table, more of a neutral, while Sierra was a complete negative. She's just way too much, and I really wish that someone else took her spot. Or I wish that the season had a few extra spots to get like a B or a Lashana in there. Next, the episodes were jam-packed with plots, and some of them didn't get the time that they needed because this season was so short. Revenge of the Island didn't really struggle with this as much as All Stars. Next, everyone except for Alejandro played like they had a rock for a brain, and it was hard to watch them be so dumb for no reason. I tried to be lenient with the first half of this season, but by episode 8, you gotta be kidding me? No, you gotta be kidding me. Episode 8 on was the worst stretch of total drama that I've ever seen. Horrible gameplay and horrible IQ for most of the players. Lame send-offs to fan favorite characters like Duncan and Courtney. Character derailment was also a thing. Duncan and Courtney were terrible in this season, and even as someone that likes Gwen, I've got to say that she's a far cry from her island self. These three were supposed to be like some of your biggest headliners for this All-Star season, but they're not good in this season. Also, this season let an overhyped showmance get to the end and add in some continuity errors, inconsistencies, and bad humor, then this just isn't a good season. Total Drama Pahkitew Island episode 1. So this is my team. In this episode, they revealed the new island, Pahkitew Island, and they revealed the new cast of players. I've got to say, with the exception of a few characters like Sammy, Sky, Jasmine, and Dave, at least Dave before the finale, these four are somewhat normal. Then everyone else is crazy or weird, which is something that I can't say for something like a Total Drama Island. When they started out, they had a decent amount of quote unquote normal contestants. Then the casting got crazier as time went on, and their quirkiness was on full display in this episode, as this episode didn't really have strong storylines. It had a bunch of character moments like Beardo beatboxing and making sound effects, Rodney liking Jasmine, Sean being scared of zombies, Ella singing, Max trying to be evil, Topher being obsessed with Chris, Amy hating on Sammy. Also, not a quirky moment, but Dave started liking Sky in this episode. That's actually going to be a big storyline for the season. Anyways, they got dropped out of a plane, divided up into teams, and they had to get supplies, guarded by Chef, and build a shelter since it's a new island. Leonard spearheaded the challenge losing Wizard Tower plan, which was ramshackle and collapsed easily, but he didn't get voted out for this horrible idea, as at least he tried. Beardo was just a complete non-factor, so he got voted out here. I'm gonna give this episode a C+. Not the worst thing that I've ever seen, like the final 6 episodes of All Stars, but there's nothing really amazing about it, which is gonna stop it from being at least a B- episode. It's just a mid episode of Total Drama. Episode 2, I Love You Grease Pig. There's a lot to unpack here. In this episode, Amy's bad treatment of Sammy got a good amount of screen time. A reason why she's mad at Sammy is because she had to wait 17 minutes for her to come out. Interesting thing to be mad over, considering that she probably can't even remember back to when she was a baby, but alright. I don't hate Amy's complaining, it's just that I don't care that much. Also, in this episode, Sean and Jasmine started having some nice interactions, which will be important later. This is the episode where Sugar started hating Ella for being nice. Also, this is the episode where Scarlett starts carrying Max. She turned one of his failed inventions into an actual evil helmet. Max really thinks that he's so evil, but that's actually Scarlett. She's just keeping that side of her low-key for now. Also, Rodney got over Jasmine. He quote unquote broke up with Jasmine and now he's onto Amy. Get a load of this guy. The challenge was an obstacle course relay race. I laughed when it was time for Sugar to hand the pig over to Ella and she's like, no, I'm keeping her or him, and she looked under the pig. But yeah, it was an alright challenge that Leonard sold, which ultimately got him voted out. I wasn't a Leonard fan, but it was fun to laugh at him sometimes, especially when he tried to summon a time reversal spell. This episode gets a B-. There was a lot to keep up with, but it was alright. Episode 3. Twinning isn't everything. The challenge for this episode was a glorified water balloon fight. Just switch the water out for stuff like bees or itching powder. In this episode, Scave started to become a possibility because Dave clearly liked Sky, and Sky basically all but admitted that she likes Dave in one of her confessionals. But Sky is so confusing because I like that she's competitive, I like that she wants to win, but I didn't like when she got mad at Dave for accidentally getting her eliminated from the challenge. This is someone that she's supposed to like, but she's not really treating him the best. She's just lucky that Dave is too love-struck, too much of a beta to clap back. Sometimes Sky is way too laser focused on winning for her own good, and it makes her unlikable and confusing at points. But this episode was mostly about the twins. Jasmine gave Sammy the confidence to stand up to Amy, which eventually happened. Amy tried to blame Sammy for selling the challenge, and instead of going along with it, she gave Amy this poisonous fruit, making her unable to talk, and she took the place of Amy, so when Sammy got voted out, it was actually Amy that left. There's no way to make that sound less confusing. But yeah, basically, Amy got eliminated and Sammy is still in the game when everyone thinks that it's the other way around. I didn't really care that much about their beef, but it was nice to see Sammy come out on top. This episode is going to get a B-. It was alright. Episode 4. I love you nots. This challenge was extreme truth or dare. The main thing that happened here was Rodney's downfall, where he couldn't be truthful when answering the questions because he didn't want to hurt the feelings of all of his quote-unquote exes that he never dated in the first place. Half of the time, no one even knows what this guy is saying. In the end, he got voted out here because he was a liability, so that's a win because I really don't like Rodney. He wasn't good at the game and I wasn't entertained by him. Just barely brought anything to the table. Another thing that happened was Sugar continuing to bully Ella. Also, for a dare, Dave and Sky were about to kiss, but Sky birthed because she was nervous and it never happened, at least for this episode. Scave is complicated, and while I want to give them credit for not just being another Mike and Zoe, the perfect relationship, Scave is also really cringe sometimes, so it's complicated. In the end, this episode is going to get a B-. Rodney getting voted out here makes it a bit higher than a C+. Episode 5, A Blast from the Past. In this episode, Sky told Dave that she likes him, and that was it, because Dave didn't let her finish. I've been somewhat on Dave's side, but I have to admit that here, he's at fault. You gotta let her finish what she was gonna say, which is that she didn't want to get in a relationship with him because he's eventually going to be competition for her. That's understandable. But later in this episode, Ella started liking Dave, and she called Dave her prince, and Sky got a little concerned. You don't really treat him the best, you haven't given him much, you don't want to be in a relationship while the game is still going on, which is what Dave clearly wants, so why are you getting upset when he potentially has his eyes set on greener pastures, a girl that's actually showing some interest in him? Luckily for Sky, the attraction was only one-sided on Ella's side, but Sky comes off as so indecisive here, and this is a reason why one of my main words that I use to describe Sky is confusing. Anyways, for the challenge, the contestants had to cross a beam, grab a stick, and bring it back to their side while avoiding getting hit by the other player and falling into the water. Scarlet is one of my top 3 favorite characters on this season, so I like how she just dominated this challenge. First, she's gonna carry Max's evil plan again and get Ella shocked by an electric eel. Then she's gonna masterfully dodge Sky. She performed so well that Max considered promoting her to sidekick, to which she got mad at in the confessionals. Another thing that happened in this episode was Jasmine throwing the challenge for Sean, but since Sean hit Jasmine in the face, then that's gonna ruin their relationship for a while. Also, Amy came back to sabotage Sammy, losing Team Kino Sewak the challenge and getting them both launched off of the island. I just didn't care much about their storyline, so it's nice that it ended here. In the end, this episode is going to get a B+. Episode 6, Mo Monkey, Mo Problems. The challenge in this episode was chasing a wild monkey around to get a gold coin and be the first team to use it at this vending machine. This episode started Jasmine's downward trend because from here on out, she's going to be really unlikable, holding onto that grudge with Sean for his actions in the last episode. Won't even let him get a word out and explain what happened. So that was that, but this episode is really about Ella. So in the last episode, she gets told that the next time she sings, she's gonna get eliminated. That's rough because I like her songs and singing is a big part of her character. Not only that, but she got her heart broken by Dave when he set up this picnic, but she learned that it was for Sky. I'll say it again, Dave is such an idiot for giving Sky so much attention instead of Ella, someone that openly enjoys his company. And last, Ella got forced into a situation where she had to sing to save Dave, which got her eliminated because Sugar exposed her, which was tough to see. Ella's my favorite character this season, and it was rough to see her so sad for a good portion of this episode. But the send-off was good. I liked her parting song. In the end, this episode is a B. The parting song plus Scarlet being a genius, carrying her team, and finally starting to plot against Max, all of that is going to get this to a B. The good stuff really balances out the not so good stuff. Episode 7. This is the pits. In this episode, they got dropped into a cave and they had to find their way out. The main stories were from Max, Scarlet, and Scave. Scarlet tried to get rid of Max by stranding him down in the cave, which would cause their team to lose the challenge. Not only did she fail at getting Max out, but Max actually ruined one of her plans. Scarlet found out that some of the stuff on the island is remote controlled, so she made a remote, but Max threw it away. Scarlet is so much better than Max, but she's kind of getting outplayed by Max right now, and he isn't even trying. Next, there's the Scave stuff. I've got to say this once again. Sky is so confusing. At the end of the episode, Sky had to switch teams, and she said she'll miss Dave, but at least Dave knows that there's no shot. The only way that this makes sense is if she means that there's no shot while they're playing the game. If not, then Sky is just being way too inconsistent. Sometimes she's in love with him, sometimes she denies it. She can't make up her mind, and that makes her so confusing. In the end, this episode is going to get a C. There was nothing really spectacular about it. Episode 8, 3 zones and a baby. For the challenge, in this episode, they had to race through 3 danger zones while carrying a baby. There was a little subplot about Max liking taking care of the baby that he got, just making him even more of a joke. But the biggest storyline is Scave. I really don't like Jasmine because although Sky already somewhat had this, Jasmine forced this cutthroat, win at all costs attitude on Sky, where she didn't even want Sky to talk to the other team. That's ridiculous. I like that Sky wants to win, and that's at the top of her priority list. But winning isn't the only thing, and I don't like how Sky got derailed because of Jasmine. But Dave isn't off the hook. He got upset when Sky made a move against him and tried to win the challenge. This is right after Sky helped him like a few minutes before, which could have been detrimental to her team. Dave has to understand that just because she's not handing him the game, that doesn't mean that she doesn't like him. It's just that they're on different teams now, so they have to compete against each other. Finally, Topher got eliminated because Chris tricked him into thinking that he was going to get a hosting gig on Total Drama and replace Chris, which caused him to sell the challenge for his team and get voted out. I didn't like Topher that much, so it's nice to see him go. But in the end, this episode is going to get a D because Jasmine was unlikable and I didn't like how Scave was handled in this episode. So yeah, it's a D. Episode 9, Hurl and Go Seek. This is the merge episode. Their first challenges of the merge were eating these expired juggy chunks at the merge mill, then playing a game of hide and seek. Not something that I'm mad about, but it's weird how Chris told Ella that if she sings, she gets eliminated, but Sugar's allowed to sing the Juggy Chunks jingle. Anyways, this episode is really about the relationships. Sean and Jasmine were bad, mainly because Jasmine kept on holding onto that grudge and being so unlikable when Sean was trying his best to make it up to her. She's not even giving him a chance, at least until near the end of this episode when Sean saved Jasmine from zombies, which were just the contestants after feeling the effects of eating those expired juggy chunks. But yeah, they got on better terms because of that. Not that I like their relationship, but at least that's a positive because Jasmine is unlikable when she's mad. But for the other half of this episode, Scave. I was mostly on Dave's side, but in this episode, he just became obsessed with Sky. He thought that she would like him because he's a fierce competitor, so he used that as motivation to eat all of the nasty juggy chunks. Then, when he got second place, beating Sky, he decided to rub it in her face, thinking that's hot when it's not. He got yelled at in front of everyone. But now, I gotta talk about Sky. She said that Dave will never be her boyfriend and has no chance of dating her. Even if you are laser focused on the game, that's still not how you treat someone that you potentially want to date. Going back to Dave, she just told him that he has no chance of ever dating her, but a few moments later, he said that he can't let Sky see him crying because she's never gonna want to date him. As if she didn't already say that before he started crying. Bro, it's over. Going back to Sky, she rightfully got mad when she was explaining to Dave that she said, "I like you, but," and he didn't let her finish. But she had a golden opportunity to finish her line, but she didn't. She just said no to Dave asking her out and stormed off. If she just told Dave about her situation, he might have calmed down, but no, she decided to be a curmudgeon. Dave voted himself off of the island because if he can't be with Sky, nothing matters. Pathetic! In the end, this episode gets an F, mainly because of Scave's handling. Episode 10. Scarlet Fever. This episode is straightforward. The island started malfunctioning because it's an artificial island, so the challenge was to go underground and get to the control room to stop the island from self-destructing. But once Scarlet got to the control room, she revealed that she's evil and threatened to blow up the island and escape if she didn't get the million, so the challenge shifted to stopping her. In the end, both Max and Scarlet got eliminated because Chris was done with evil, which was unfortunate because I actually liked both of them. I'll give this episode a C+. It ended up being underwhelming because Scarlet taking over the island was fun, and the way that the others took Scarlet down was creative, using a Chris robot head to trick her into opening the door, but that storyline was just too short as she only took over the island halfway into the episode. Also, I didn't like Max's elimination, so yeah, C+. Episode 11, Skyfall. The challenge was racing up a mountain. It's the final 4 rounds, so they're going to focus on Jasmine and Sean as a pair, and Sugar and Sky as a pair. Jasmine wanted Sean to split the money with her if he won the game, and vice versa. Jasmine wanted to open this flower shop cage fighting school, which isn't as bad of an idea as Sean made it out to be. His was actually worse, wanting to make this bunker to protect him from all of the zombies. But I've got to say, Jasmine wanting this deal is lame, especially since she was so rude to Sean for like the middle stretch of the season. Definitely my least favorite character left, so I like that she got eliminated in this episode. Now for the good part, Sugar and Sky. Mainly Sugar provided the most comedy. It's like Sugar was so lazy, but so unintentionally good at this challenge. Also, it was funny when her sabotage attempt on Sky failed, then she lucked into sabotaging Jasmine and took a lot of credit for it. She's so funny in this episode. I'll give this episode a B+, mainly because of Sugar. There wasn't much to like about this episode outside of Sugar, but she was amazing in this episode, so yeah, B+. Episode 12, Pogged with Talent. In this episode, the final 3 had to create challenges to compete in, so everyone made a challenge based on their specialty. Sky won her hurdles race, Sugar won Sean's zombie survival challenge by accident, but Sugar lost her own talent show, which got her eliminated. I really enjoyed Sugar in this episode because of the comedy that she brought. Like in the hurdles race, she thought that because she collected the most hurdles, she won. And in Sean's challenge, she was completely outclassed athletically, but somehow won, which is like a slap in the face to Sean and Sky. I even liked her performance in the talent show when she tried to combine country and rap, and she was so confident that it sounded good. She brought so much comedy. Her only mistake was making her challenge a talent show instead of an eating contest. Sugar really made this episode for me, just like the previous episode, so it'll get an identical B+ rating. Episode 13, Lies, Cries, and One Big Prize. The final challenge was a race across the island. The final 2 got a random helper, so it ended up being Jasmine and Scave. Sean was happy to see Jasmine, but Sky wasn't happy to see Dave, so Chris told Dave about her whining, which made Dave sad. So Sky kissed Dave so that he would focus on the challenge. She manipulated his feelings for her own gain, which makes her unlikable, especially since Dave was crazy about her and she was wishy-washy. The first half of the race doesn't matter at all because when Sean and Sky were tied, Chris halted the race to expose Sean and Sky. Now Jasmine knows that Sean doesn't like her flower shop cage fighting school idea. Now Dave knows that Sky has a boyfriend, and that caused both of the helpers, mainly Dave, to get mad. That acted as fuel for them in the next part of the challenge where the helpers got to try and sabotage the final two and win the money for themselves. Jasmine's unlikable because she's mad at Sean for not wanting to split the money when that's reasonable, and she hasn't treated him the best this season. Sky is unlikable because she manipulated Dave. Also, she had a bunch of chances to tell Dave about her relationship and her situation, and that probably could have saved Dave a lot of pain, but she decided to act like a curmudgeon. Dave is unlikable because he turned into a psycho over this one girl when there's plenty of fish in the sea, and he actually had a girl in Ella that treated him with respect, but he ignored her. The most likable person here is Sean, and even then, what he wanted to use the money for was dumb. There's no one that I was really rooting for, but in the end, I'm going with Sky as my winner. A lot of my winners have been clear cut, but this could go either way because one of them didn't play a game that was miles better than the other. Although Sky was more of a flawed character than Sean, she felt like more of a main character than Sean. Like, she had that production or writers backing to her. It could go either way, but I have Sky as my winner. In the end, this episode is going to get an F. The first half of the challenge didn't matter, and when Sean and Sky got exposed, there's no one to really root for. It's an F tier finale that rivals All Stars. Right now, I have it as a better finale than All Stars, but that could easily change depending on the day. Total Drama Pahkitew Island was a season that I used to hate, even more than All Stars actually, because of my mindset that all-star characters equal amazing season, which is not true. But now, after rewatching this season, I've got to say that it's better than All Stars and would have been better by a large margin if it didn't struggle with Scave and Jasmine. But that stuff happened, which brings this season down. It's a far cry from Island and World Tour, but it's at least an average okay season at points. Total Drama presents the Ridonculous Race, episode 1 and 2, none down, 18 to go. Rather than a camping Survivor style season with Chris McClain, this season is an amazing race style season with Dawn as the host. The episode starts with everyone getting their introductions. The returning players are Leonard the LARPer from Pahkitew Island. There's Jeff, finally getting back into reality TV after taking a 4-season break from playing. Considering that he went out so early in action, it's been a while since he's actually been a legitimate, serious player, so it's nice to have him back. And last, there's Owen and Noah. When I was watching Ridonculous all those years ago, I was confused as to why Owen and Noah were partners, but they actually had a good thing going in World Tour, so it makes a lot of sense. For the challenges, they had to either climb up 144 flights of stairs or go up an elevator and skywalk across the tower. Then they had to board a plane to Morocco, choose 5 spices, ride a camel, find a restaurant, give the spices to the chef to make some stew for them to eat. Then when they finished, they had to race to the chill zone. There wasn't much in terms of plot lines because there's a lot of mouths to feed. 36 contestants, so there's a lot of flipping around. Because of that, most of these episode ratings are going to come down to how good the challenges were. They were solid in these 2 episodes, so they're both going to get B pluses. Episode 3. French is an Eiffel language. They went to France for the challenges. One racer had to draw a caricature of their partner, which was my favorite challenge, especially when Noah drew that picture of Owen eating the Eiffel Tower. Next, they had to go into the catacombs and find their way out by following the cheese smell. Next, they had to paddle on the cheese and sail to the Louvre. I love that callback to World Tour. In the end, the tennis rivals got eliminated, which is unfortunate because I like them, but that's not going to stop this episode from getting an A- rating. Episode 4, Mediterranean Homesick Blues. They were still in France. For this episode, they had to swim in shark-infested waters to get their next clue, which was my favorite part. Just seeing all of the different ways that everyone dealt with the sharks was fun. Then they had to build a sand castle, which was my least favorite part. Then they had to take a speedboat to their next chill zone. In the end, the geniuses got eliminated, and I don't really care that much because they're nothing characters. So yeah, I'll give this episode a B. It's solid. Episode 5, Bjork and Telephone. They're in Iceland for this episode. Their challenges were to run over some geysers and correctly say this Icelandic phrase that they were given. My favorite part was when Dwayne got slapped in the face because he probably said something offensive. I really liked that Junior came through and got the phrase right because his dad is such an embarrassment. Next, they had to either eat an Icelandic meal or grab a fossil in the caves. I was a little disappointed that this was a non-elimination round and the vegan stayed because I don't really care for them and less characters should leave room for better and more focused storylines. In the end, it's a solid B+ episode. Episode 6, Brazilian Pain Forest. In this episode, they're in Brazil. They had to grab a tip from a mitt filled with bullet ants, which was my favorite part. Then they had to cross a gorge and find their next tip in a pile of coconuts, then make a costume, then hang glide into the chill zone. The challenges were fun and it was fun to see the ice dancers out of their element because they're usually perfectionists, but they got there late so they were a bit more chaotic in this episode. This episode is a solid A. Episode 7, a tisket, a casket, I'm gonna blow a gasket. They went to Transylvania. For the challenges, they had to drag their partner to a graveyard while they were in a coffin, complete some gymnastics challenges, then race to the chill zone. Noah fell in love with Emma here, which is great because I always felt like he left a little bit too soon in World Tour to make space for Duncan, and now he has a solid storyline. Also, in this episode, they got rid of some randoms in the fashion blogger, so it's an A. Episode 8. Hawaiian Honey Ruin. They're in Hawaii for this episode. For the challenges, they had to dive into an ocean to get a ring. I laughed when Carrie dove in and hit her head on a rock because she was so love-struck, so focused on Devin, someone that only views her as a friend. Next, one person had to carry their partner across some hot coals, then race to the chill zone. I don't like the ice dancers, so I like how they missed out on second place and they threw a fit over it. The only thing that I didn't like was how Noah spent this whole episode crushing rather than making moves. This episode is gonna get a B. It's an alright episode with some good moments. Episode 9, Hello Dubai. They went to Dubai. The first challenge was an either or. Return a serve from the world's toughest tennis launcher or wash a column of windows. Then they had to find the chill zone in the gold sook. My complaint about the last episode was that Noah was just crushing on Emma. That's it. So I like how in this episode, that storyline got more focus with Owen and Kitty teaming up to try and get Noah and Emma together. Also, Noah saved Emma from falling and they made an alliance. It was a good episode for them. I also liked how the ice dancers had a little meltdown when they got 4th place. This episode is going to get an A. Episode 10, New Beijinging. They went to Beijing for the challenges. They had to skydive into the Bird's Nest Stadium, eat a skewer of fried animals, then travel to the Great Wall of China and look for the chill zone. This was an episode that gave a good amount of focus to Noah and Emma and their partners trying to get them together, which was a fun thing to watch outside of the challenge. Also, I liked how the ice dancers had another meltdown when they got 4th place and Dawn made fun of them. This is an A episode. Episode 11, I Love Ridonculous. They went to Finland for the challenges. They had to sweat it out in a sauna for 10 minutes, cross a river, and air guitar in front of an audience. My favorite parts of this episode came from the beginning when Owen got upset that he couldn't take his clothes off, which is a nice callback to World Tour in that Grease's Pieces episode. He's so willing to take his clothes off for some reason, and it's always fun when he gets shut down. I also liked when Kitty poured a bucket of Owen's sweat on her, but I didn't like that lame air guitar competition. This episode is going to get a B. Episode 12, My Way or Zimbabwe. They went to Zimbabwe for the challenges. They were selfie based. Take a selfie while falling over Victoria Falls and take a selfie with a rhino. Dwayne was horrible in this episode. I just don't like helicopter parents. Also, the ice dancers only survived because it was a non-elimination round. I wanted to see them go, but I understand the importance of having villains, so yeah. The challenges were alright, but not the best, so this episode is going to get a B-. Episode 13, the Shawshank Redemption. They must really like the Shawshank Redemption because Total Drama Action also had a parody title, the Chefshank Redemption. Anyways, they went to Australia for a prison break challenge, then they had to build a raft and sail to the chill zone. I wasn't interested in the main story that they focused on, which was Carrie trying to tell Devin that she likes him, but I always love a good prison break, so this episode is going to get an A-. Episode 14, Down and Out Back. Again, I really don't care for Devin and Carrie's plot, which got a decent amount of focus, so this episode comes down to challenge enjoyability. They're in Australia. For these challenges, they had to collect 10 rabbits, then glide to the chill zone. This wasn't their best set of challenges, so this episode is going to get a C. Episode 15, Maury or Less. They went to New Zealand. The challenge was an either or, bungee jump off a bridge and catch a fish, or jump around and perform a dance. The challenges were all right, and this was yet another episode where I was interested in Noah and Emma's sort of relationship and how it ended. I was interested in that way more than the other storylines. This episode is going to get a B. Episode 16, Little Bull on the Prairie. They went to Alberta for the challenges. They had to eat some pork and beans, then ride a mechanical bull for 8 seconds, which I enjoyed the mechanical bull part. A big storyline was how Noah was crushed because of what happened in the last episode where Emma said that she can't be with Noah, but at least she told Noah that she can't date him until after the race. Take note, Sky. In the end, Dwayne and Junior got eliminated. I didn't like Dwayne, but Junior was one of my favorites, so it's sad to see him go. In the end, this episode is going to get an A. Episode 17, Lord of the Ring Toss. I wasn't really interested in the storylines, a big one being Stephanie and Ryan being dysfunctional as always, so yeah, this episode is all about the challenges. They went to the Arctic Circle. For the challenges, they had to find the ring and toss it onto the tusk of a narwhal. Then they had to build an igloo. I actually really enjoyed these challenges, so this episode is going to get an A. Episode 18, Got Venom. They went to Indonesia. For the first challenge, they had to get a container of kimono dragon saliva. This was one of my favorite challenges. Just seeing all of the ways that everyone tried to work around that dangerous situation was fun, especially when Owen dressed up in some kimono skin. The second challenge was finding a rug with the Ridonculous Race logo on it. Not the strongest challenge. In the end, Noah and Owen got eliminated, which is unfortunate because I was actually enjoying them in this season. Owen works better in the Ridonculous Race format where he just has to focus on a challenge, maybe make some jokes here and there, rather than the Total Drama Island Survivor style format where there's a lot more strategy involved in those seasons, and he's not a strategist at all. This episode is going to get an A, especially for the kimono challenge. Episode 19, Dirt Buggies. They went to Las Vegas in this episode. The challenges were to collect flags on a dirt buggy or perform a magic trick. These were both good challenges. The biggest story here is that finally, Devin realized that he likes Carrie, but Carrie stopped caring about Devin, which is really unfortunate timing. Devin is such a pinhead for not picking up that Carrie likes him. In the end, this episode is a B+, mostly on challenge strength. They were good, but not great. Episode 20, El Bunny Supremo. They went to Mexico for the challenges. One contestant had to eat a pepper, and the spiciness of it determined the height of the cliff that their partner had to jump from. I like spicy food, so I like this challenge and just seeing everyone's reactions to eating those peppers. For the second challenge, they had to ride some burros to the chill zone. Although I don't like Carrie or Devin, I like that Carrie spent a lot of time with Ryan, making Devin jealous. It's what he deserves for being such a pinhead. Although Carrie's not off the hook, it's like whenever one of them has a crush on the other, they just won't stop talking so the other can confess their love. That happened like way too many times. In the end, it's a B+ episode. Episode 21, Canoodling. In this episode, they went to Vietnam. For the challenges, the final 6 pairs had to create these 2 super teams to either catch a certain amount of fish and go through some tunnels to find the Dawn box, which had a map to the chill zone, or they could catch a fish with the show's logo on it and just go to the chill zone. I like the Survivor style seasons of Total Drama, so I like this episode where the pairs got to team up and actually interact with each other. From this team up, Jose and MacArthur got to work together on some sabotage, which was fun. This episode is going to get an A+. Episode 22, How Deep Is Your Love? They went to Russia for the challenges. They had to ice sail to a Dawn box, then find a ball in an underground cavern. I didn't really find the storylines to be interesting. It was more of that Ryan and Carrie friendship that I'm not interested in. I'm also not an Ice Dancers fan, so I didn't like their sabotage that much. But at least the challenges were solid, so this episode is going to get a B+. Episode 23, Darjeeling with It. They went to India for the challenges. They had to collect a basket of tea leaves and race to the front cart of the Darjeeling Express, which was actually the best part of the episode. In the end, the daters left, which I definitely would have liked to see the Ice Dancers leave, but the daters leaving here is fine because they weren't really my favorites, especially Stephanie. In the end, this episode will get a B+. Episode 24, Last Tango in Buenos Aires. They went to Argentina for the challenge. They had to perform this tango dance, then capture their emu and bring it back to the chill zone. The main thing that happened was that Devin finally told Carrie that he likes her, and they kissed. Like I said, I don't really care about them. They're both pinheads. Noah and Emma were better. Speaking of Emma, it's a good thing that the sisters stayed over the best friends. With the help of a medevac, of course. They lost this round fair and square until Kitty's emu pushed Devin off of that cliff. But I enjoyed them more than the best friends, so it's nice that they stayed. Also, the surfers got back in the game. In the end, it's a B+ episode. Episode 25, Bahamarama. They went to the Bahamas for the challenges. They had to search for a treasure map and find the treasure underwater. The only part that I didn't like was that the sisters got eliminated because they were some of my favorites, but they had a good run. This episode is going to get a B. Episode 26, A Million Ways to Lose $1 Million. They went to New York for the challenges. They had to get a briefcase at the top of the Empire State Building, take it to the midpoint chill zone, and search for the combination to unlock their briefcase for the directions to their final chill zone. These were some of the best challenges of the season. Definitely in the A tier for challenges. Also, at least the Ice Dancers didn't win. I didn't really like them that much. They were cringe. Also, off topic, but for some reason, they kind of remind me of Gunther and Tinka from Shake It Up. For my winner, I like Jeff because original Total Drama, but in the end, the surfers got eliminated. There's a guy that won Survivor after being eliminated, and he's routinely put at the bottom of winner rankings because even though he played a good game, when he got back into the game, he still got voted out of the game, which is something that can't be said for all other Survivor winners in their winning season. Same here. I like Jeff, but Police Cadets won this. In the end, this is an A tier episode. Total Drama presents The Ridonculous Race is a spin-off season. It is a race rather than a camping season, and the show just moves at a different pace. I even considered not including this season in the video because it is different and it is not a typical camp season. Also, last year, I gave up on covering The Amazing Race because it was so linear that it's hard to have interesting thoughts on the show. All of my videos just turned into episode recaps. I had the same problem with the Ridonculous Race as well, where there's no real strategy or social gameplay for the most part, which I'm really into. The quality of the episodes mostly came down to how enjoyable the challenges were, but on its own, for what it is, separate from all other seasons, Ridonculous Race is actually a solid season. Total Drama Island 2023, Episode 1. Meet the Victims. They're back where it all started, at Camp Wawanakwa. I liked how all of the contestants rode in on their own boats. It made it feel like the original Total Drama Island. My favorite moment in the introduction was when Julia got all of her phones tossed in the ocean. Also, I liked when Ripper asked if the cabins were co-ed and Axel dropped her bag on his foot. I liked the obstacle course, especially when everyone had their reactions to Ripper ripping his pants. Also, Although I question why he was voted out over someone like Emma, I've got to say, Caleb was the perfect person to get eliminated first. He's a Justin and Alejandro ripoff that was way worse than them as a character and gameplay wise. Also, he just didn't add that much to the show, to this first episode. So it's nice that he went out over someone like Emma that's actually providing some drama with Chase and that whole breakup. There was some cringe in this episode, but this is actually a solid way to start off the season, so it's gonna get an A. Episode 2, Pirates of the Caribbean. The pirate ship battle was actually amazing. I also liked that Axel versus Ripper became a big deal in this episode because it was a fun rivalry or butting of heads. What I didn't like was that they were on the chopping block and Axel went over Ripper. Axel really started to grow on me in this episode. In the beginning of this episode, she eliminated some squirrels and Chase was like, "And these are?" Then Axel said, "Dead." Then Chase was like, "Yes, I meant before." And Axel was like, "Alive." Even though she was a zombie survival type of person like Sean in Pahkitew Island, she reminded me a lot of Eva, but funnier. This episode is going to get an A. It was solid. Episode 3, Drowntown Abbey. This was an episode that was really focused on the challenge, which was to save their teammate from drowning. They had to go through an obstacle course and grab passcode numbers that would help unlock and free their teammates from their drowning situation. The challenge itself was really solid. What wasn't solid was Nichelle crying about needing a stunt double and how that was such a big deal. I didn't really care, and with the amount of time spent on her sob story, Julia should have drowned. But this was balanced out a bit by Scary Girl dominating the challenge, which was fun to watch, especially when she beat up the bear. In the end, this episode is going to get a B. It was alright. Episode 4, Numbskull Island. In this episode, the challenge was to capture the skull, which is basically capture the flag. I liked Scary Girl's chaos more than the challenge, especially when she got on the jackhammer and started chasing folks around. She reminds me a lot of Izzy, my favorite character in all of Total Drama. But unfortunately, Scary Girl got eliminated in this episode, which I saw coming because of the spike in screen time. In the end, this is an A episode. Episode 5, Jurassic Fart. So in this episode, the contestants were served baked beans to make their challenge harder. For the challenge, they had to race to the other side of the island while avoiding raptors. Because they ate the baked beans, they farted a lot, which gave away their location. The only part of this episode that I liked was when Julia roasted that raptor and hurt its feelings, exposing her true colors. Outside of that, it's just everyone farting a bunch. It was fine when it was just Ripper, but everyone else farting is just too much. Also, I could only imagine trying to eat a snack or something while watching this episode. It's an F tier episode. I just don't enjoy that humor. Episode 6, Launch Back of Notre Dame. The challenge in this episode was catapulting teammates into target zones, which was fine, but I was way more interested in Julia versus MK and how Julia shifted the target off her back by exposing MK for watching everyone's confessionals. I like Julia more, so I got the perfect outcome for this episode when MK left. In the end, this is a B episode. Episode 7, Severe Aches and Pains. In this episode, they merged, and the challenge was to bring back a cassowary egg. This episode turned into a love fest, with Chase and Emma getting back together, and Raj and Bowie had their thing. This episode was all over the place at points, and overall, it was mid, so it's gonna get a C. Episode 8, The Wheel of Vomit. The challenge in this episode was a brunch of disgustingness-esque food eating challenge. I wasn't really fazed by any of that disgusting food that they were eating until they got the giant tapeworm. Now that's nasty, but at least Julia won invincibility. In the end, Ripper got eliminated, which I was fine with. In the first maybe 1 or 2 episodes, he was alright, but after that, he overstayed his welcome and was a worse version of Owen for most of his run. In the end, this episode is gonna get a B. Episode 9, Battlefield Earth. The challenge was a race to the top of this honey-filled mountain in which Julia won. I really enjoyed her and Bowie's rivalry in this episode. Also, a big storyline was Z being in the middle of these two alliances. Priya Julia and Millie as an alliance, and Bowie, Emma, and Chase as an alliance. And both of them thought that he was on their side until the elimination ceremony. He got eliminated, which was unfortunate because he was one of my favorites, but in the end, this episode is a B+. Episode 10, The Truth, The Pole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. Contestants had to compete in a challenge where they had to balance on a pole in the water, with Chris bribing them to come down with many food items. Reminds me of those original Survivor challenges. This episode made me really not like Chase. He's way too desperate for Emma, and he sabotaged Millie and Julia in the challenge just for some food. Good thing that he got eliminated because he's my least favorite out of this group. In the end, this episode is a B. Episode 11, Tortoise Rigor Mortis. The challenge was to take selfies with animals. The person that gathered the most points wins. This was actually a really fun challenge, especially in the end when Julia and Emma battled to be the first one to take a selfie with a turtle. This episode is going to get an A. Gets the nod over the Ridonculous Race episode because it actually has a character that I like. Episode 12, Caved by the Bell. For the challenge, the final four had to go into the cave and bring back the most coins to win invincibility. This episode was Julia versus the world, as everyone was against her, and I knew that she was getting eliminated when Bowie detailed his plan to get rid of Julia first, then expose Millie in the final three to have her fighting with Priya, making his job easier. Bowie just has that aura, like everything he says goes, and that's what happened as Julia, my favorite character this season, got eliminated. She had a good run. I'm gonna give this episode an A-. The episode was a little bit above average until Millie got exposed at the tail end of this episode. Now that's juicy. Episode 13, Magma Cum Laude. The final three faced off for a spot in the final two. The first challenge was to make a raft and cross a lava lake. Bowie and Priya won, so for Millie, this was really about trying to rekindle her friendship with Priya, which happened. For the final two challenge, they had to race up a mountain, get into a turbo orb, and race down. In the version that I watched, Priya won, but I definitely have Bowie as my winner. Like I said earlier, he just has that aura. Everything he says goes, and he just always seemed to be a step ahead of his competition. In the end, this episode gets an A. Good way to end the season. Total Drama Island 2023 was a good season. Actually, it was better than I expected because I know that it can be tough to rekindle that magic after such a long time off, but this season actually ended up being solid. They had fun characters like Julia and Scary Girl and amazing gameplay from Bowie. Also, the elimination order was amazing. Like, everyone except for Ripper went at the perfect times. The only thing that I really didn't like about this season was Chase, but aside from him, this season was actually solid, and it's one that I would actually rewatch. Alright, it's time to rate every episode of Total Drama Island Season 2/Part 2, as Season 1 and Season 2 are actually all part of one big 26 episode season. For this video, I'll be referring to the first 13 episodes as Season 1 and the last 13 episodes as Season 2 because it makes more sense. The rating system will be the same as last time in the rating every episode of Total Drama video. It's going to be a letter grade system. Good episodes get A's, bad episodes get F's, and then there's everything in between. Alright, it's time to get in here. Episode 1. The Pink Painter Strikes Again. This episode starts off with a recap of the last chaotic season, and it brought back some good memories. Like I said about that season in the past, it surprised me and I didn't expect it to be as good as it ended up being. But getting back to the recap, Chris said that Priya won last season, and throughout this episode and the season, they've made it clear that Priya won and Bowie lost, and there's no room for an alternate ending where Bowie wins. This was interesting because in most seasons, they structure it to where they never really say that a finalist won or was a runner-up, so both endings can be canon. I talked about Bowie as if he was a winner because I thought that there was going to be an alternate ending out there, but if that's not the case and Priya's the only winner, then that's fine. So yeah, The contestants got dropped out of a helicopter, and once they got on the island, they started getting their intros and talking about being back on the island and reconnecting with others, which was fun. The best part was when Emma shut down Chase. I really just don't like that guy at all. Season 1 was a great, spectacular season, but at points, it was weighed down by Chase, so it's good that they're not trying to make Chima happen, and maybe Emma can have some plotline or something for herself outside of Chase in this season. Next, the 2 finalists got to pick their teams. Priya got Millie, Emma, Caleb, Damien, Axel, Z, and Nichelle, and they're going to be Team Ratface. While Bowie got Raj, Wayne, Julia, Chase, MK, Scary Girl, and Ripper, and they're going to be Team Skunk Butt. On paper, Priya's team is very uninteresting because she has to work with some early exits like Caleb and Nichelle. But there's a lot of intrigue on Bowie's team, and most of it stems from Julia. Like, Bowie played a big role in Julia's elimination last season, so I want to see that rivalry continue and see how it plays out this time around. Also, Julia and MK had a little incident last season, but instead of continuing their beef, they actually teamed up this time around out of respect for what they showed in the previous season. This alliance that got formed right here would go on to be such a focal point of this season. After they picked teams, they had to compete in this challenge where they had to get to a finish line while avoiding Granny Hatchet throwing paint balloons at them. This was such a fun challenge, with folks getting eliminated in funny ways, like when Z's soda gave him away. In the end, Team Rat won, sending Team Skunk to the first campfire ceremony, where I've got to say, at the ceremonies, Chef still gives these little rundowns of the day and explains reasons why someone can be voted out for the main folks on the chopping block. That stuff just came out of nowhere in season 1, and now it looks like it's going to be a staple, which is nice. Sometimes it's funny, especially when Chef is so smug about it. Anyways, they voted out Scary Girl, Normal Girl, whatever. They voted her out here. There was this plotline where she changed her look and tried to be normal, but once she revealed that she studied everyone to learn this, they decided that they're not having none of that nonsense and got her out immediately. I was spoiled on this before the season released, as I sort of alluded to in my top 10 favorite total drama characters video. I was hoping for a big bounce back season for Lauren, so I'm really disappointed that now she's gone out really early in back-to-back seasons and her new Normal Girl plotline never really got a chance to get off the ground. But that's not going to drag this episode down, no way. The Julia and MK alliance got set up in this episode, and the challenge was fun. It's a solid A-tier episode. Episode 2, Taking It to the Rim Reaper. The challenge for this episode was this slide basketball, where they would slide down 3 different slides that were 3 different lengths to try and score a basket. Unlike last episode, where everyone got a decent amount of screen time, this episode was really only focused on 3 things. One of them was the challenge itself, to which that's fine. It was an entertaining challenge at points, although as it went on, it got a bit repetitive. Chase also got a lot of focus because Emma tricked him into trying to make a video about sliding down the slide because he always gets stuck on making the intro, so that happened, and Emma taunting him was fun. First time she's ever made me laugh. And lastly, Ripper had a crush on Axel, and that got brought up a decent amount of times. Interesting because last season, they were really going at it in that Pirates of the Cabbagean episode. The best moment in this episode was when Ripper was about to slide down and he wanted Julia to get Axel to notice him, but not to be too obvious, but Julia just blurted out, "Yo Axel, this nude butterball has a crush on you and wants you to watch him slide." In the end, Team Skunk lost, and to my delight, my favorites were safe in Bowie, Julia, and MK, and on the chopping block were Chase and Ripper. Perfect because I don't even like them, especially Chase. But in the end, it was obvious that Chase was leaving because Ripper and Axel just have to be explored more, so that's understandable. This episode is going to get a B. All right challenge, and there were some fun moments, but I didn't like that they gave Ripper and Chase so much screen time in comparison to the others when there were more interesting plots in the background, like Julia and MK's plan with the employee uniform. Also, Caleb was really working Priya and actually playing the game this time around, so that would have been interesting to see, and it's why this episode can't get rated any higher. Episode 3, You Poor Saps. In this episode, for the challenge, they had to race to the other side of the island while having this sticky sap on them, which would make the challenge harder. Kind of reminds me of the Jurassic Fart episode from last season where that was also a race to the other side of the island. There were two storylines that were being pushed to the forefront in this episode. One of them was that in the last episode, there were actually 4 slides. The fourth one was dangerous, but it granted 4 points. So Millie pushed Damien down there because they needed 4 points and she didn't want to split the slides up 3-1 because she's lazy. Then after this, everyone was disgusted with her move, especially Damien, which is understandable. In season 1 and season 2, Damien is like the Charlie Brown of this cast, Milo Murphy's Law, like whatever can go wrong will go wrong for him. So yeah, Millie spent most of this episode focusing on that, once being unapologetic because they won the challenge. Then near the end, when she realized that she was definitely in the wrong, she tried to apologize to Damien. But the plot that took over was MK and Julia. So what happened was the employee uniform finally came into play as MK used it to sneak into a production meeting and she learned where the sap remover was. So that gave their team a real advantage and MK and Julia started going around the island and sabotaging folks and they still won. Going back to Millie, in the end, she was voted off as there was no real setup for anyone else to go, which was a perfect outcome. She's terrible, but she's not going to bring this episode down. In the end, the Julia and MK alliance finally got off the ground for real when they dominated this challenge and they were fun to watch. They stole the show and they're a big reason why this episode is going to get an A+. Fun challenge, fun villainy. Episode 4, Choosing for a Bruising. For the challenge, they had to answer these would you rather questions while walking across a bridge, and if they got a question wrong, they fell. There were some smaller storylines like in the last episode, Wayne and Raj were so upset that their team cheated, so that was being talked about. Also, Caleb was slowly working on his alliance with Priya, and the Ripper and Axel love story, whatever, finally materialized as they got together at the end of this episode, to which they weren't really my favorites. I don't really care about the couple, but it doesn't take away from the show. But the best plots revolved around Julia and MK, then Emma. Julia and MK cheated once again when MK snuck off to get the cheat codes for the challenge and they started dominating. Then the other good plot was when Emma kept on blurting out the wrong answers and Priya tried to take advantage of this by telling Caleb to just go with the opposite of what Emma said. When Z exposed that so casually, Emma got so mad. It was also funny how Emma had a chance to clinch the win, but she got the last question about Chase wrong, which lost the challenge for Team Rat. In the end, Emma was voted out here, to which I didn't really care about her in the last season, but in this season, she was good fun in her short run as a nice punching bag, and I really wish that she would have been like this more often. Being a punching bag probably isn't good for building a character, especially one like Emma, one that probably should have had a big solo arc this season without Chase. Wasted potential for sure, but as a comedic character this season, Emma works in her limited time. In the end, this episode is going to get an A-. The challenge was a bit repetitive, just answering questions and walking across a bridge. It's not that riveting, but MK, Julia, and Emma carry what could have been a B-tier episode to an A-. Episode 5, Ice to Beat You. For the challenge, they had to go through this iceberg and collect keys to unlock a safe, grab a coin, and bring it back to Chris. This episode was all about secrets. The one that got kept was Z not telling Caleb that Priya likes him, which was surprising that Priya told Z after his abysmal performance in the last episode and his track record overall. But the secret that didn't get kept was Bowie's involvement in the cheating. Raj really cared about Bowie playing a clean game, so Julia used this as leverage to have a bunch of control over Bowie. Kind of reminds me of Scott using Mike's secret as leverage in Revenge of the Island. Some fun moments in this episode were when Julia and Nichelle got into a little argument about Hollywood movies and what role they'd be qualified for, to which Nichelle said that Julia isn't a movie star, she's more of a small town dinner theater type of person. I laughed out loud when Nichelle said that. Also, another funny moment was when Z took a Waz on the ice that his team was supposed to be jumping on and melted it. Also in the challenge, another good moment was this big chaotic snowball fight with Bowie, Raj, and Wayne going up against Julia, MK, and Ripper, trying to stand up to the cheating. Team Skunk is definitely providing more entertainment than Team Rat so far. And for the elimination, that Julia and Nichelle argument came into play when Julia got Nichelle to quit because she made a fake movie contract for her. I was relieved when I saw this because I really thought that I was spoiled when one day I saw this Twitter X post in my feed saying something along the lines of, the category is athletic women that, and I didn't read the last part, but I saw Nichelle along with Zoe and Sky, total drama winners, and my gut just sank like, wow, I got spoiled and I wasn't even looking for spoilers. But whatever that was, ended up being not what I thought it was or a prediction or whatever. All that matters is that Nichelle got eliminated and tanked, I've got to say. All that training just to be a forgettable pre-merge exit again. It was an unfortunate situation to have to root against Nichelle and what I thought was a spoiler, but it was good that ever since Nichelle got eliminated, I wasn't going into every episode with the assumption that she's immune, and now that opens up the door for the good characters. Bowie can't make it because he's already made a final, but Julia and MK are still in the running, and Caleb's gameplay has been really good this season. Even though he's supposed to be a similar archetype to Justin and Alejandro, it's nice that success isn't coming to Caleb immediately and he has to build up his alliance with Priya through multiple episodes, unlike some alliances that Justin and Alejandro made. But yeah, for this episode, it's definitely going to get an A+. So far, it's the funniest episode of the Revival series. Episode 6, Can You Believe It? It's merge time. Very early actually, it's only the 6th episode, but yeah, that's something to look forward to. In this episode, MK got exposed for her cheating, and it was hilarious that for a punishment in the challenge, she had to go up against a bear. Speaking of the challenge, they had to partner up and take these canoes to the lake and compete in this jousting tournament. The challenge was good fun. There were some interesting pairings like Raj versus Bowie and Ripper versus Axel, where Bowie and Axel both had to forego their love for their partner to advance in the tournament. Damien won immunity, and it was nice to finally see him get something to go his way. Like, he had to go through a gauntlet of Z, Julia, and Bowie to get his win. David versus Goliath settings. But the standout storyline for this episode was Priya and Caleb. For a few episodes, they had been talking here and there, but in this episode, they actually got to spend an extended amount of time together in the challenge and while looking for the immunity idol. And through this, they got to flirt and learn about each other on a deeper level, which got Caleb to actually like Priya for real and see her as more than just a number. This episode got me to realize that they could be a fun couple and have more substance to them than the comic relief Ripper and Axel pairing. For the vote, Bowie got voted out over MK after Julia framed the cheating on him, which was unfortunate because those were my three, Bowie, MK, and Julia, but like I said, Bowie already made a final, so it was a good call to let MK stay over him. In the end, this episode is going to get an A. The only thing that could have got it an A+ was more MK and Julia content, as they were separated for most of this episode and only really reconnected at the tail end. But it's not a huge deal because the challenge and prelude were solid enough. It's all this episode needs to get an A. Episode 7, Fun Fight at the OK Corral. For the challenge, they got divided into teams and they were tasked with baking a Chris McLean cake. Elephant in the room, Owen, Big O, came back for the challenge to be a disadvantage in the challenge and a judge. Now this doesn't answer like what happened to the All-Stars, as at the end of that season, most of them floated away in bubbles that Owen was blowing. And he was in Ridonculous, so yeah, he's totally fine. Not sure about the others. But that aside, it was nice to see an old contestant in this revival that feels a bit disconnected from the original run, so it's nice to see that the revival is getting on top of that and connecting the worlds in continuity more. Owen being here kind of reminds me of Revenge of the Island, when they were bringing back Gen 1 contestants almost every episode to be part of a challenge in some way. Nice to see Owen here, and hopefully this opens up the door for more guest appearances or flat out a mega season with all of the players from the camp seasons just battling it out, or a second All-Star season, something like that. But yeah, getting back to the challenge, it was an entertaining challenge all around in every way. There was a fun section in the beginning when everyone got to the battle barge and started fighting over supplies, just so much chaos. Then Julia got paired up with the Hockey Bros, and since they're so incompetent, she had to carry like her name was 2018 LeBron James. I couldn't stop laughing at the scene where the Hockey Bros were playing baseball with the eggs and Julia let them have it. Speaking of carry jobs, MK also had to carry her team because Axel and Ripper were too busy eating each other's faces and romancing it up. The part that was the funniest was when Axel was painting a portrait of a shirtless Ripper. Add in all of the sabotage like Owen trying to eat the cakes and the kitchen quake, then this was a fun challenge, especially at the end where the Damien, Z, Priya, and Caleb team lost because they used Ripper's armpit yeast in their cake, handing the dub over to Julia and the Hockey Bros. For the vote, they split up the showmance, getting Axel out of there, which got Ripper to run after her, so he's out of there as well, to which the showmance was funny in this episode, but for the season, I didn't really care about them that much. They didn't really add much or take anything away from this season. I've been talking about Julia and MK a lot, and Priya and Caleb are starting to become something nice, so there were more interesting dynamics and pairings to focus on. Also, Damien found the idol in this episode and is cementing himself as a big player, so there were just other players that were more relevant. In the end, this chaotic episode is going to get an A+. No way it was going to get anything lower. The challenge was so fun. Episode 8, Allin' and Ballin'. For the challenge, it was this pinball challenge where they had to carry these big admission coins up a mountain to get in. Then when they got in, they had to rack up points. The challenge design was amazing because they had a scary girl robot and an Izzy head right next to each other. Also, they had a Dunkney section, so that was nice to see. There were some fun moments in here, like Wayne and Raj causing a rock fall, and when MK's coin launched in the air, she said, "How will it end? Heads or tails?" and it landed on her head. But this episode was all about the secret, the Z-crit that Z was trying to keep in, even though it was outdated and Caleb actually got feelings for Priya legitimately. Julia spent most of this episode trying to pry the secret out of Z, and he kept on putting stuff in his mouth to make sure that never happened. Like for that beginning section, it was hilarious when he was just walking around with his pants in his mouth. But after a long day of holding in the secret, he finally told it right after Caleb and Priya kissed, which made Caleb such a pariah. Too bad Z couldn't keep his mouth shut, as he also made himself a pariah by blurting out everyone's secrets. The other secrets were whatever, but I laughed out loud when he said that MK sleeps with a stuffed unicorn named Theodore. In the end, Z got voted out over Caleb, which was questionable as Caleb's definitely a bigger threat than Z, and Caleb staying here can only be summed up to having plot armor. Z's an open book and he's such a non-threat in challenges and dictating the social game because he just goes with the flow. While Caleb just got exposed and for all they know, he's a manipulator just like his predecessors in Justin and Alejandro, players that have been decently successful, especially Alejandro. The new Total Drama seasons have been a lot more strategy focused and every elimination makes sense and gets a solid explanation, but that can't be said for this elimination. They really just voted Z out because they got their feelings hurt. And I should have knew that Caleb wasn't leaving because he and Damien have aura running through their veins in this season, just like Bowie in season 1. Gotta see what happens to Damien's idol. Gotta see the aftermath of the pre-lip situation, so they're not going anywhere. But yeah, it's not a huge, atrocious deal because although it was a forced elimination that doesn't make any sense, this was the second time that Z had a hilarious elimination. This is definitely going to get an A. It's just filled with a lot of fun moments, and now, going forward, the Caleb and Priya romance plot can finally face some adversity instead of being so one-sided. Episode 9, the breakup episode. For the challenge, they had to bring back the biggest thing they could find, then fit it through this mail slot in a door, which meant that they had to break down the stuff so it would fit. This stuff led to a lot of fun chaos, with Wayne destroying the outhouse and MK destroying Chef's car. Speaking of Chef's car, how is he even getting that thing on a remote island? Aside from the challenge chaos, there were two main things that were being pushed in this episode. One of them was the pre-lip breakup, where Caleb had to play as this big outcast because of his actions, and for most of this episode, Priya was mad at Caleb and Caleb was trying to make it up to her. This goes back to the Z vote, like everyone here wants Caleb out so badly when they could have got him out last episode instead of wasting their votes on Z because they got their feelings hurt. Just seeing how everyone was acting in this episode calls that vote into question even more. It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, just talking about Prelim now, their relationship was solid and I wanted to see all sides of them, see everything they had to offer with this breakup and what would come of that and how they'll overcome it. But nothing interesting came from this episode. Instead of having a heart-to-heart conversation, it was just Priya being mad, which is understandable, but that's it. She just whines all episode and she's really annoying. Pre-lip tanked in this episode, just not that interesting, but a pairing that didn't tank in this episode, at least entertainment-wise, was MK and Julia. Had to say entertainment-wise because they literally tanked in this episode, like it was the fall of the MK and Julia alliance. They couldn't manipulate Priya and use her emotions for their benefit. They couldn't get Caleb, a lone wolf pariah, into their alliance, and because Caleb won immunity, MK and Julia ended up having to turn on each other, resulting in MK's elimination. It's unfortunate because they were dominating this season. They carried, but all good things must come to an end, and this alliance went out on a good note when MK left, respecting the game and hugging Julia. For that, this episode is going to get a plus tacked on to what was going to be a B grade, making it a B+. Alright challenge, solid chaos, but they prioritized Prelude over the much better MK and Julia storyline in this episode, which wouldn't have been a big deal if Priya wasn't so annoying. So yeah, this episode is going to get a B+. Episode 10, Circling the Drain. For the challenge, they had to memorize the placements of campers on the board, and if they got the question right, they got a point, but if they got it wrong, then they get a specialized punishment based on the person that they picked. This episode right here was a Julia masterclass, like she had a hand in everything that was going on. At the challenge, she and Damien had a nice little back and forth trying to mess with each other's answers. Julia got Damien crushed by a scary girl skull. his favorite, and Damien got Julia blown into the air by MK's hair dryers. Also, another thing that Julia was involved in was trying to keep Prelib separated by giving them bad advice, but once they found out that they were getting played, it turned into a 2 versus 1 in the challenge, which Julia won. It was funny when Priya was crying about the rules because she selected the right answer but on Julia's tablet after fighting her, and Chris was like, "Oh, you shouldn't have turned the memory game into a wrestling match." And the Julia Fest doesn't stop there, as she got to share immunity and she gave it to Caleb in exchange for him promising to vote her way for the rest of the season, which made Priya so mad. And it doesn't stop there, as later it was revealed that Julia stole Damien's idol, causing him to be vulnerable for this elimination and eventually getting eliminated. The folks in that writer's room love Julia, like this episode is all about her. I would have a problem if it were someone like Ripper that got this amount of propping up, but Julia is an amazing character, so it's not a problem at all. In the end, this episode is going to get a B- because of this tough balancing act. On one hand, this episode made Julia a more relevant character than a Prelib showmance that's starting to overstay their welcome, so that's perfect. But there were problems in this episode, like the challenge itself not being too interesting and the character interactions really having to carry that portion. Also, Julia versus Damien was fun, and I wish that could have continued rather than what's going to be Julia versus the showmance, mainly Priya. This was a big season for Damien, and I wanted him to go further or at least outlast Priya. In episode 9, MK's elimination was bearable because although in a way the showmance was prioritized over her as Caleb won immunity, at least that was a nice place to wrap up MK and Julia's story before it potentially got stale, like how Prelib is becoming. But Damien's story felt unfinished, like he had more to give to this season. Now with Damien taken out, that's now 2 solid characters in Z and Damien that were taken out just to advance the showmance, and they were totally forced and all 100% because of Prelib to help them make it another round. Priya should have been gone in this episode, like Caleb finally confessed his love for her and they made up. That should have been the end of their story for this season. But they tacked on this Caleb working with Julia plotline for more conflict between Prelib, and they're gonna drag out something that should have concluded in this episode. Julia's chaos is always fun to watch, but Prelib's plot armor wasn't fun to watch, so it has to fall somewhere in the middle with a B- grade. Episode 11, Working K9 to 5. For the challenge, they had to avoid these dogs, and if they got caught and brought back to the circle 3 times, then they lost. MacArthur made a guest appearance as the leader of the K9 unit. This still doesn't affect anything that I had to say about the Ridonculous Race and where it ranks as a season, but she's one of the better characters on that season, and it's nice to see her again. After having such a standout episode in the previous episode, it made sense that they cut back on Julia in this episode, although she is in the most powerful position in the middle of 2 pairs that need her vote. She was fine in this episode, like she won her immunity and facilitated the vote, but yeah, this episode was more so about the pairs. The one that the show really wanted to focus on was Prelib and where their relationship is currently, now that Caleb has this agreement with Julia that got Priya to doubt Caleb even more. Then there's just Wayne and Raj being this comedic pair that they've shown flashes of, but those were only flashes. Now that they're in the final 5, they have a bunch of time to mess around with without having to share screen time with like a Bowie or Axel and Ripper. The hockey bros are always saying some nonsense, especially Wayne. The funniest part was when Raj dressed this dummy up in his clothing and the dog shredded it, and then Wayne was just there grieving, actually thinking that was Raj. I thought that Priya was going home because she already won and she's getting dangerously close to making another final, but unfortunately, it ended up being Raj after he and Wayne just had their best episode, which is unfortunate. This episode is going to get a B+. It's a fine episode that had some highs like MacArthur showing up, and Wayne and Raj were fun all throughout this episode. But Prelude found a way to skate by again. Raj gets taken out here because of the combination of the Caleb and Julia deal dragging him around as an extra vote, and the Hockey Bros being so fixated on getting Caleb out rather than Priya, last season's winner, so there's no votes to get Priya out, and the most powerful player in the game is protecting Caleb for his vote. This situation was crafted just to ensure that Prelude would make it through this episode, and now regardless of what happens in the next episode, they're still gonna be in every episode because that's the penultimate episode, then everyone comes back for the final. It's just unfortunate because I'm not trying to hear any more showmance bickering when they should have been split up in the previous episode. I'm not even a Raj fan at all, but it's unfortunate that he gets taken out here and the showmance gets to last another episode when they have nothing left to offer. These past few episodes have been fine, they have some fun elements, but they have to take a prelude tax, which lowers their rating some, which is why this episode gets a B+ rather than an A-. Episode 12, Off the Hook. For the challenge, the final four had to try and send each other into these tanks of terror to face their fears, and the winner would be the only person left standing in the pit outside of the tanks. Really, this episode was Wayne off to the side, missing Raj, and while that was going on, Caleb had this big decision to make because he had an agreement with Julia, but Priya wanted him to go against Julia and vote her out. It's similar to the Grand Chef Otto episode from Revenge of the Island and the Ice to Beat You episode from this season, where someone has this information, secret, deal, whatever, and they're using it as leverage, forcing the person that they're manipulating to go against their significant other. It's one of those type of episodes. There was a good amount of Julia and Priya fighting, and Caleb struggling to make this decision on if he's going to throw the challenge to Julia or play for himself and Priya. In the end, he just hooked both of them and took immunity for himself while not having to pick between them. But for the vote, he finally ended up picking between them and backstabbing Julia and the deal that they made, as she was voted out unanimously. But Julia's immunity idol saved her, and she got the sole vote to send Priya packing. Thank you! Get off my screen! Priya had already won last season, and they milked the prelude storyline until there was nothing left, so that's a small win, but it doesn't matter a ton because she'll be back in the next episode. In the end, this episode is going to get a C+. There's usually a limit to how good episodes can be when they have a small cast, so there's that. But also, the challenge wasn't that interesting, and like I already said, Prelude overstayed their welcome. Even the Julia versus Priya of it all wasn't that interesting this time around because they've been going at it for a few episodes now. Try something new. Also, the elimination was very predictable because unless they wanted to break one of their main rules that's been established since the beginning of the series, then Priya had no chance to make it through this vote at all. It's an episode that had nothing horrendous or outstanding, which would have got it a C, but Priya's elimination was delicious, so yeah, it's gonna get a C+, but it's definitely below the penultimate episode from last season. Episode 13, Sore Losers. This time, it's a 3-person finale between Wayne, Caleb, and Julia, which was an interesting call. But if they had another challenge to decide a final 2, then it would be obvious that Julia is a guaranteed lock to make the final 2 because of the girl-boy format that they've implemented for every season except for Revenge of the Island. Good call to skip that and just get right into the final challenge. Give all 3 of them a chance to win. For the challenge, it's kind of like Total Drama Island 2007's final round, where the finalists raced around the island and got assistance from their helpers. Everyone got the helpers that I was expecting, like Wayne got Raj, Bowie, that type of crowd. Caleb got Priya, Damien, and more, while Julia only got MK for support, which was just so fitting that they got to end this game together because they carried this season on their backs. Their interactions were a bright spot in this finale. Also, something else that was fun was the return of Scary Girl when, for some reason, MK gave Scary Girl a t-shirt launcher and she knocked Julia off course. Also, it was funny when Scary Girl couldn't contain herself when she heard about Caleb and Julia crashing through a tree, and she started singing about this in a confessional, kind of like her song last season about hiding bodies. Scary Girl Lauren being in this finale just reminded me of how fun of a character she can be, and it made me wish that, a character like her probably isn't going to win a season or anything, but she would have been nice to keep around for 8 or 9 episodes for some comedy. Anyways, for the most part, this race was between Julia and Caleb until Wayne just came out of nowhere and lucked his way into a win, making him one of the worst winners ever. Wayne is a good character, but he's not a good winner. He's not a guy that embodies this season. That's the first person that I think of when I hear Total Drama Island Season 2. Definitely not him. He's just a comic relief character that was fairly disconnected from the main stuff that was going on, and he lucked his way into a win over a decent amount of players that would have been more satisfying winners. The worst part about these 2 seasons is that this could have been okay. There was a way. On a normal season, they would have had a separate ending for Bowie, the real deserving winner, the real mastermind of season 1. Then for season 2, they would probably structure it differently to only have 2 endings, but the idea of Wayne, Caleb, and Julia all having an ending sounds nice. And even if they could only have 2 endings, it would have been fine because Julia and Caleb would have been better winners than Wayne, and at least one of them would have an ending to override Wayne's ending. But they ditched alternative endings, at least from what I'm seeing right now. Even though both of these seasons have not been released in the United States at the time of this recording, that seems to be the case, that there's no alternative endings. The only canon winner from this season is Wayne, which is unfortunate. Julia deserved it so much more, especially in this generation of Total Drama that focuses on strategy much more than the other seasons. She made solid alliances and deals with MK and Caleb that helped her get through the game. She stole Damien's idol and controlled and contributed to a lot of eliminations, even getting out Nichelle, a person that wasn't even on her team. Julia was also a good challenge beast individually, and team-wise, she showed her worth in the challenges, which got Bowie to look elsewhere when he initially only drafted her just to get rid of her immediately. Julia played the best game this season, and it's unfortunate that she couldn't win just because she's a villain when, even in the show that Total Drama is modeled after in Survivor, villains can win. She played the most dominant, cutthroat game for 2 seasons in a row, and all she's walking away with is a mullet after her friend, the Raptor, bit off a lot of her hair in this finale. I knew that she had no chance to win because she's a villain, and now, unless they want to get really crazy, she has no chance to win in potential future seasons and maybe get a Heather-style redemption arc because she already made a final, so that's a letdown. I spent a lot of time harping on Julia, but Caleb winning also would have made a lot of sense, as even though Prelib ran out of steam near the end, at least he had some good character growth in this season, and he was important to the narrative, and he was good at challenges, like he had some wins under his belt. Even players like Damien and MK would have been better winners than Wayne. The final was really good, one of the best in the series, but factoring in Wayne winning and getting the worst outcome, that's going to bring this episode down to a B- grade. This could have been an easy A+ if they had alternate endings, but that was not the case. Total Drama Island Season 2 Part 2 is a mixed bag. The season started off great actually. They experimented with stuff like Normal Girl and Ripper and Axel being a pair, and Millie taking a bit of a villainous turn for some time. Hit or miss stuff, but it didn't hurt this season because they had MK and Julia to fall back on. There was a lot of fun to be had with MK and Julia's cheating scandal and how it affected those around them, mainly Bowie and Raj. There wasn't a ton going on of real importance outside of MK and Julia, which could have been a negative that they're screen hogging, but it doesn't matter a ton because they're a fun pairing, and for the time that they were together, they carried. Prelude, on the other hand, wasn't good, especially in the later episodes. That's the pairing that I look at and then get upset about Emma's screen time and Nichelle's screen time and Normal Girl's screen time. Maybe if they took Prelude out, then Normal Girl's plot about trying to be normal could get fully realized. Maybe Nichelle gets to showcase her training more and goes on a challenge run and makes it deep into the merge. Maybe Emma gets some storyline to free her from just being one half of Chima. And there's more possibilities that couldn't happen because Prelude overstayed their welcome and they let a previous winner make it to the Final Four, just robbing players like Z, MK, Damien, and Raj of more satisfactory conclusions. When I decided to watch this, the first 8 episodes were streamable and I had to wait about a week and a half, 2 weeks for the remaining 5 episodes. I've got to say that it wasn't really worth that long of a wait. Like, the final 5 episodes were underwhelming for sure. There were some solid moments in those episodes, like MK and Julia's goodbye, and Julia versus Damien was a nice small moment. Also, MacArthur visiting the island was nice, and Wayne and Raj also went crazy in that episode. But they could never truly muster up a top tier episode because after MK left, Prelude became so overpowered, being able to stay over everyone, stay over better characters, and they were just front and center for the last stretch. Like, everything had to revolve around them. After the first 8 episodes, I was ready to mark this down as one of the elite seasons. But relating this back to my track running experience, the one thing that I always took with me is to always finish the race strong, regardless of what place you're in. Sometimes that can be the difference in placing, and when it comes to scouting, that last little stretch is the lasting image that someone has of you. Season 2 didn't finish strong. It wasn't awful, like I've seen worse out of Total Drama, especially in All-Stars, but this season definitely finished out about average, which was a disappointment considering the pace and trajectory that this season was on. For where it ranks in the series, it's going to take some time to get some distance from it so all of the recency bias can go away and the season and everything that happened can settle in. But for the ranking at this moment, if it kept up the pace that it was going on in those first 8 episodes, then it was going to land somewhere in the top tier with Total Drama Island 2007 and Total Drama Island Season 1 Part 1 in the top tier. For now, Season 1 versus Season 2 is done. Definitely Season 1 over Season 2. Season 2 had higher highs, like Season 1 never had anything as nice as MK and Julia. But Season 1 didn't have anything as bad as Prelude, a relationship that actually started out nice, but they weren't that interesting in the later episodes and they hogged up screen time from better characters. Season 1 was just a more consistent, stable, all-around season than Season 2. But yeah, back to its ranking, taking everything into account, if I had to go back to my season rankings video and place it somewhere, then Season 2 is fighting for 3rd, 4th, or 5th place with World Tour and Revenge of the Island. But it goes no lower than that into that action and all-stars territory, as this season was still fun, even when it was falling off. Like, there were still moments. In the end, I was critical of the ending and harped on it a lot, but overall, this was definitely a good season of total drama. For a letter grade, a B+ for this season is good for now, and for a letter grade for the whole entire revival, the whole entire 26 episode season, it's gonna get an A. It was a big success. Hopefully, this wasn't the last of total drama with this cast, because they were solid and there's still some characters with untapped potential that could really benefit from having a third season. But yeah, really enjoyed this season, really enjoyed rating all of these episodes, and yeah, that's about it. All right, that's every episode of Total Drama rated. The process of watching all of these episodes and taking notes for the video took 4 months, but it was worth it. I really enjoyed watching such an important and inspirational show and finally making a video on something that gave me so much happiness all those years ago. This was fun, and yeah, that's about it.
I won't let you down, Bruce. I'll keep fighting. Always.